nearly double the Wales and UK average of 8.9 and 9.4 respectively. 70% of employees here worked full-time and 30% were in part-time employment. And the median weekly full-time earnings in Paris was £519. Wales was 542, UK 586. The average household income in Paris was 33,458, which is slightly below Wales and quite a lot below the UK at 40,257. 55% of households in Paris earn below the Paris average. 27% of all the jobs here are in the wholesale, retail, transport, hotel and food sectors, and 14% work in agriculture, forestry and fishing, which is well above the Welsh average for that one of 3%. Paris has the lowest gross value added per hour worked in the UK and has done since 2008. The reason for this is the residents work on average much longer hours than others, mainly due to our strong agricultural sector, and full-time workers work on average just under 41 hours per week here, with only Herefordshire having a slightly higher figure of 41.1. Paris has maintained a higher rate of economically active residents than the rest of Wales. So in the last 10 years, that rate has remained stable. However, there is a need for a focus on the quality of jobs in Paris. So we have a lot of in-work poverty. High levels of employment in industries such as agriculture and tourism has also been a thing on the low wage sector. And this, tempered with high rates of self-employment, long working weeks and very low gross value added per hour, means that residents are working hard for low pay. So what do we know about Paris culture and communities? So at the time of writing, we had 1 in 5 residents speaking Welsh, and there was variation across the county from 54% of Welsh speakers in the Huntleth locality to 8.6 in Knighton and Prestine. Most Welsh speakers were aged 5 to 15 years old. We know that the new census 2021 data shows there has been a reduction, and we now have 16% of the population speaking Welsh. 32% of people volunteer in Paris. Those that do feel that they have a purpose. It promotes social cohesion and helps them to connect with others. There were just under 6,906 crimes at the time, and the highest type of crime was violence against the person. And the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, the Welsh Government's official measure of relative deprivation, identified that Paris is poor for access to services. So just under half of Paris areas are in the worst 20% in Wales in terms of access to service. And Newtown East ranks 31st out of the whole of Wales in terms of the most deprived areas. And that's out of a total of 1,909 altogether. So it's important to explore the reasons for this and how we can tackle deprivation and poverty in the future. Finally, what do we know about the environment? So enclosed farmland in Paris it contributes to about 1/4 of Wales, and it covers 47% of Paris. In Paris, the majority of rivers are not achieving a good ecological status. There are many reasons for this, including climate change, pollution, abstraction, and invasive non-native species. Similarly, air quality is being affected, and climate change is influencing our environment. We've seen more frequent flooding and changes to our weather. In terms of energy efficiency, Paris is a large county with many older, inefficient houses, and there is a reliance on solid fuels due to the location of many of these. Many households have to run more than one car due to where they are and limited public transport. And finally, so in terms of the engagement and feedback that we've had from different surveys, the Living in Paris survey, which was conducted early on in our wellbeing assessment time, so this was June, July 21, we had a total of 475 responses. A variety of questions were asked around the 7 wellbeing goals, which are to have a more equal Paris, prosperous, healthier, cohesive, globally responsible, and a thriving Welsh language. So with that survey, the top 3 priorities that people felt to put in a wellbeing plan were providing accessible services tailored to people's needs, tackling isolation and loneliness, and supporting increased digital access among residents with lower usage rates. So then in the autumn of 21, we had a wellbeing assessment survey. So the wellbeing assessment went out as a draft to the public, and they fed back. Basically, we had 614 responses. There was a wide range of data analysed. The data sets was focused on 18 key well-being areas, and people were asked to pick the top 3 of the 18 they thought most important to well-being. And so the top 3 were health and lifestyle, educating our children, and jobs and wages. The 3 least important that people felt to well-being were Welsh language, forestry resources, and tourism. So finally, at the end of last year, we engaged on the draft corporate plans. That was late November through December, and we had 614 responses in total there. And the feedback provided will be reflected in the plan now shortly, which will be published. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Members, information there on this wellbeing plan. Any questions, comments to be made at this stage? Any hands up?
No.
From myself,
Yes.
Catherine, I would just to take you back on. Who's that now? Sorry, Councillor Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Can I take you back, please, to one of your last slides? What do we know about the environment in Powys and air quality? Can I ask where you get your stats from to put up that statement aimed at agriculture? It could be interpreted as quite damning for the agricultural industry within Powys, which above it you said is 47% is Powys. In one of the previous slides, you said the 17.8% were self-employed, which I could suggest is mainly due to agriculture. So if I can ask you, first of all, where do you get that statistic from? We're backed up by data about the air quality. The tourism in Powys is great, and people come here because of the fantastic air quality. So I'd be interested to hear back from that, please.
Yeah, so the whole environment section in the wellbeing assessment was aligned with the Mid Wales Area Statement, which is published by Natural Resources Wales. So all of the data that's within that whole section derives from Natural Resources Wales and the way that they calculate their environmental measures.
So you've got data to say that the air quality in Powys is poor purely because of intensive agricultural units. And if you've got that, could you share that with this scrutiny committee, please? Like, I know, Chair, if you will allow me to carry on, I'm a farmer and I have got a poultry unit here, and I know the stringent measures that I had to go through to get this. With ammonia modelling, a huge amount of ammonia modelling has to be undertaken for all units, and NRW have moved that from a 3% cumulative impact on SSIs or whatever down to 1, which has made such a difference on the ease of getting planning. So this is something that has been addressed, and as a rural county, by your own admission in these presentations, I really am concerned about that statement. So if you could have that information shared with us, I think that would be beneficial, and I really would question whether that statement needs to be in this presentation moving forward. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. This document is before us, and it's open to comment. Obviously, it's here to give that relevance to the Education Committee. But yes, you make a relevant point, and that document's before us. So yeah, I'm allowing comment on it. Councillor Aled.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, that did jump out at us immediately. Very strange to have that there. You have the 50-mile-hour zones along motorways and bypasses on towns. I'd rather live in Powys than underneath the M4 in Port Talbot. I think the air quality probably is slightly better, even next door, if you live next door to Gareth. But my main point is about, these stats are familiar to us. Access to services, low GDP per hour worked, but I have to ask, why do the Welsh Government only fund 70% of Powys Council's expenditure, unlike other local authorities where they fund 80% of Powys council expenditure? That would make a £60 million difference year in, year out, if we were near the average of support that we get from Welsh Government. I know I've made the point before, but it hasn't changed. We are sort of 30% self-sufficient. The local authorities nearby are only 20% self-sufficient. And I think that's an important factor that we need to bang on about, because it really impacts on services that we can provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aled. Councillor David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I note that Newtown East is 31st on the list. Have we got any other areas in Powys that are close to that?
Yeah, we have other areas in the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. So there's St John's in Brecon. We've got an area in Ystrad and one in Welshpool.
Okay. Could we have could you send information of that to us?
Yep.
Where they stand, that would be useful. Thank you, Councillor David. I'm going to take Councillor Danny, and then Emma's looking to come in. Councillor Danny.
I'd like to see some more information on the average earnings per household. I believe that even though that's the average earnings, I should imagine it doesn't reflect the amount of people that is in a lower wage. I would say that amount of money seems quite high, indicating that there's a few on a higher wage, but it doesn't reflect how many are on a lot lower wage. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Danny. Emma.
So, Chair, in all helpful questions that Catherine, as you were, presented the findings of the wellbeing assessment that's already been published. So these will be data sources that are available nationally, or on some occasions, some of the data will be information that we hold locally. And the question really now is around when we look at the corporate plan, the draft corporate plan, and you can see within there are three objectives for consideration. We need to think about, is the corporate plan going to address some of the points that we found through the wellbeing assessment, and ultimately going to make an impact on individuals? So, for instance, cost of living and poverty was one of the elements that was coming out of the wellbeing from the social aspect. And one of the things that we need to think about there is in respect of, our education, our housing, those elements. We've got to try and think of the plan based on what we've heard, based on what we know, and based on the direction the plan is going, whether we feel it's going to meet some of those and address some of those elements that are being felt in the wider society across Powys currently. So things like access to services, also the employment element picks up. We can think about the aspiration of increasing Welsh speakers, because if we increase Welsh medium education, hopefully we'll have more Welsh speakers in the county if we can retain them, and then by having more Welsh speakers within the county, then we can recruit more Welsh speakers and we can provide a better offer, and it increases in that way. So that's the sort of element now that we need to think about from the scrutiny perspective. And then this plan also to go forward in line with the MTFS and the budget next month, and the scrutiny that's due later this month. So I hope that's helpful, Chair.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, Emma. It certainly brings us very. Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just attempt to answer the question that Councillor Aled put earlier about the settlement we received from Welsh Government? I was quite surprised he asked that, actually, being an ex-finance portfolio holder, because he knows full well that it comes via a formula, and the formula includes such things as deprivation, population numbers, etc., etc. And obviously, Powys being relatively underpopulated with the size of the county, that does impact it. The other thing that goes against it is the fact that our council tax base is very, very high, because we've got high property values. in Powys. So were that replicated with the actual council tax base, were it to be replicated with some of the valleys communities, for argument's sake, which would bring down the council tax base, then you'd see the proportion, the percentage of Welsh Government's contribution and council tax contribution changing quite significantly. So it could quite possibly be 72% to 28%. But that's why we've got that difference there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David. I will let you come back, Alan.
I'm aware of the difference and why it happens, and the funding formula is controlled by the Welsh Government and its colleagues in local government as well. But it's the weightings that they put against rurality is what really impacts. The formula is complicated, but it is possible to adjust the weightings, and it has been recognised a little bit about 3-4 years ago in social services. Powys did get additional money then, but it wasn't enough. It was a start, but it wasn't enough, and it's important that we keep on banging the drum and making sure the Powys is fairly funded, because council tax doesn't represent the ability to pay. It just reflects the values of the houses. It is a high charge on a population that has got way below average earnings. So it's important to remember those factors. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think you just
okay. David, I'll allow you to come back, but we're
just to mention,
certainly getting off track here.
He's quite correct when he says, that we've got this problem with high value properties and low income. But where there is a low income and high value property, a high banded property, obviously they'd have access to the council tax reduction scheme. Just to mention that point, Chair.
But not always.
Come on, let's get back on track. Councillor Karina.
Sorry, just a small point, but you mentioned that almost 80% of people are economically active. I don't, that sounds high to me. Have I got that wrong?
Anybody coming back? Catherine, are you able to come back there?
Yeah, I will check, but that is that is the data that we had.
I wondered if it was the working age population, up to 65, say.
Oh yeah, the 16 to 64-year-olds.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Maybe I misread that. Thank you.
Members, Emma put this into perspective in regards to our committee. Are you content that we've got the information from the plan, and we've got the ability to reference that in future work programs and seeing how we're contributing to that? Are you happy to move on? Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, happy to move on.
Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, just something related, Chair, which maybe we're going to address later on. But in the documentation on the web, the links to the various other documents don't seem to be working. I don't know if that was just me, but it makes it much harder to read the document in its entirety and make sense of it when you can't access the links easily.
Okay. I was able to use the links last night. Win.
Chair, just had a look at it myself because that was raised in a meeting this morning, and I'm having difficulty myself with it. So I think I need to go back to the report authors and just have a conversation about, I think it's some way it gets lost in translation between the original version and then going on to the modern system. So something's happening we need to solve, because those links would be useful for everybody to be able to see those documents directly. So we just picked that up this morning, so we'll go back and solve that, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. Members, we're moving on to item 6 on the agenda, the school funding formula. We did, just for information, we did have a quick pre-meet this morning just to clarify a few points for some of our committee this morning. So we are better placed to comment on today's, oh, sorry, I'm jumping here on the catchment review admission. Sorry, item 5. Just for information, this is a catchment review, and it is in relation to admissions, and a school transport policy will be reviewed in the future. Undoubtedly, they are interlinked, and there will be some comment today. But if we can just remember that the catchment review is in relation to admissions. Anwen Orrells, who we all know, is going to take us through this report.
I believe, thank you, Chair, but I believe perhaps Councillor Pete, the
Yes.
portfolio holder, would like to come in first.
Sorry, Councillor Pete, that is remiss of me, really. I'm jumping the gun here, trying to think of more than one thing at once. Councillor Pete, welcome to the meeting. Please introduce item 5 first, please.
Thank you, Councillor Gwynfor, no offence taken. The catchment map is something that you'll see across local authorities, and it's basically an indication to the public about the schools that they are entitled to send their children to, and if the school is oversubscribed, they will have priority over. It is generally one school per household, so that a school will not appear in more than one catchment. But it is something that, as an authority, we haven't had written down. We've had a series of ad hoc arrangements that have developed over the course of years. We've had schools merging together and pupils and parents being told that they've got a choice, and that has become embedded into the culture of the authorities area. This was brought to a head in 2020 when the change to the home to school transport policy specifically referenced catchment maps within its definition of home to school entitlement. And it has taken between then and now to get to the point where we have a draft set of maps that have been out to consultation and that we are now today reviewing with you in scrutiny, where we're looking at what you might call the bones of contention, the areas where one or more individuals have put in an objection to what has been proposed, which has then been brought back by officers with suggestions to myself. And effectively, Anwen and I sat down and worked through each of them, taking them one by one, and tried to establish a set of consistent approaches so that when we'd formulated a reason for a decision in one, we took that forward and took that into account when we looked at maps onward. In most cases, we are completely comfortable with what we have put forward before you. But there's one in particular, and I'm going to ask Anwen to bring that to you last when you've seen all of the others, and that is the location of bulk, where if we take the same methodology and the same methodical approach that we have elsewhere in the county, we find ourselves with a huge set of anomalies. So we are looking very much to you, having laid out how we've gone through things and the problems that we've encountered. We're looking for a very strong steer from you today as to what you think we could have done differently, or whether you actually agree with the conclusions we've reached. And at that point, seeing that my video is having problems yet again, seems to be a recurring theme over the last few days, I'm going to put myself off camera, but I am listening and I will contribute as appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Chair, would you like me to come in now?
I was introducing you there, but I realised I was just mic'd up. Yeah, no, Anwen, your documents are on screen now, so yeah, please carry on.
Diolch o galon, diolch o galon, Cynghorydd Pete. Thank you very much, Councillor Pete, for giving the introduction. I will just give you a quick overview so that everybody is fully aware of where we've been with the school catchment review over the last few years. So a very, very quick overview. The reason this has arisen is there is a difference in between pupil learner entitlement and parental entitlement between admissions and home to school transport. So to make everybody aware, admissions authorities must make arrangements to enable parents to give their preference. So a parent or a learner, apologies for the phone, will have the choice to choose a school of their own liking, the one that they feel suits their child best. And if there's place within that school, they will be admitted or given place within the school. However, the difference is when it comes to home to school transport, the law says we must provide free home to school transport for learners who live more than 2 if it's primary, or 3 miles if it's secondary, from their nearest suitable maintained school. And our Powys policy states that we'll transport to the nearest suitable school or catchment school. Now, I need to make you all aware that if these are all passed, following scrutiny today and Cabinet at the beginning of February, that this won't impact any pupil or any current pupils until September 2024. So this is when these will first be in place for admissions from 2024 onwards. To give you some background as well around catchments, all the primary catchments are primarily based on nearest school, and that's one of the main principles, as Councillor Peat suggested, that we've kept to very much. It is their nearest school. However, we've made small amendments to reflect local topography and geography. And then within Powys, what we've done for strength in transition arrangements, all the secondary catchments are based on an amalgamation of the feeder primary schools. So here in Powys, our schools work really, really strongly in clusters or together, and that's been exceptionally important as we move towards the curriculum for Wales. And then the ultimate aim of this work is that ultimately we have already designed, if it all goes through well, that we will have a joint online system for admissions and transport. So when a parent and learner looks to apply for a school place, they'll get all the information about their nearest schools and their Welsh medium schools, etc. But on application, a learner and their parents and guardians will from that point understand if they are or not entitled to free home to school transport. So the overall aim is to give parents that open and transparency so that they can make informed decisions. So to give you where we've been with this, so we undertook an informal consultation with the last administration back in November 2021. So we involved all local members, all governing bodies and all schools back in November 2021, along with statutory committees such as admissions committee, etc. Following that, we reviewed all the comments and we went out to public consultation between 7th of February 2022 to 14th of March 2022. And as a result of the public consultation that went out to all the general public and wide coverage in many committees, governing bodies, members, etc., we received 430 responses, and those 430 responses came from a range of parents, grandparents, teachers, governing bodies, community councils, learners, and of course from different members. 11% of the comments back were in agreement with the maps we had proposed, but it's no shock, 89% were in disagreement. And I need to point out, as Councillor Peat did, most of the disagreement and most of the comments did come from the area of Bulch, which Councillor Peat has asked me to put in last. And the main comments that came back, remembering that all the catchments are actually based on nearest, most of them were minor amendments to the catchment boundary, which I'll take you through, and then some requests for change to school clusters. So those were all papers and pages 43 to 52 of your papers. Because of all the legal documents that I'd put in, if you have got your papers, it's now page 538 that you need in your document. So I'll give you a second or two just to go forward. And I will keep an eye out for hands up. So I will take you through. So there was a first range of comments, and I've organised this in form of the clusters from the secondary clusters. So starting with the Brecon High School cluster of schools, the first comments came back from a small place called Llaneglwys, located here. And some of the people wanted Llaneglwys to be within the Cradock catchment. However, on review and consideration, remembering the nearest, but also taking into account the distances, the main roads and the infrastructure, it's officer recommendation that we have no change, and that Llaneglwys should remain within the catchment area of Archdeacon Griffiths Church in Wales School. I'll pause, and if there's no comment, I'll keep on going. The second, oh, Councillor Lucy.
Sorry, just need to unmute again. It was a general point really, and when I found when looking at these maps, I can see looking at them that you've done your best to set it out so that it is clear. But for me, it would have been much more helpful to see the two maps side by side in the same scale and the same colours, so that you could clearly, and with the background showing through more clearly, so that you could clearly see the differences, because I find it quite difficult to see the differences between the two maps. But I also, when I was reading through the document, I found that I was missing that information about the thought process that was gone through in terms of the decision making. So we've got the responses from the parents or grandparents or governors or whoever it is, and then we've got the final decision, but we've got nothing about what went into that final decision and why, which would be really helpful, because it really doesn't give me the sort of security in feeling that you've taken account of the information that was provided. So that was just general points, really.
Thank you, Councillor Lucy. Chair, you happy if I come back?
Yeah, go on, keep going.
Okay. It was firstly on your first point about demonstrating this, it was very, very difficult because they're all on different systems, and we always use the live system so that we can zoom in and out as we want. So I did play with it so in a way that tried on paper rather than on the actual live GIS system, which we use on a daily basis with the local authority. So I will take that on board, but I did do my best. To come into the second element of your question regarding how we came into the decision, to re-emphasise, our premises is nearest school. So that's where we maintained main element. Is it then nearest school? Because that's the legal position. So we only amended it if we felt when it came to the infrastructure and to the distance, and perhaps there was a sort of rain shadow, so the top of the mountain or something like that, we looked at it from a sensible infrastructure. Would it be easier, so for this example, to go from Llaneglwys to Cradock or to Archdeacon Griffiths School? So we did, Councillor Pete and I, go through each and every one where we'd had comments, looked at distance, but also looked at the road networks. In most of the cases, there were minor tracks or B roads before they would hit the main A roads. And, you know, taking into account days like today, some schools are closed, some buses couldn't run. So trying to make sure that the routes we're looking are as accessible and as sensible for our young learners.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, content, Lucy?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Go on, Anwen.
I think Councillor Alled's got his hand up.
Oh,
sorry.
apologies.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, no, go on, Councillor Alled.
Just very quickly, Chair. You have got two distances there at 7.9 or 8.4. I'm not sure why you put two distances. I thought we measured everything. GIS system?
I did. I put the two in case there was an argument, because you could travel two different ways. When we went and looked at it, there was two different ways. So I just thought I'd give the overview. Okay,
but you mentioned a route planner. Is that different to GIS?
No, I believe, and I've John Forsey, who's transport, isn't here yet, but I believe that they do look at the alternative routes.
Okay, no, but what I'm saying is there's a shortest route, and that is a sensible route.
Yeah, I do. I hear that.
And you know, and the GIS to specify quality of road, or you can't go on a muddy track and that sort of stuff. So there shouldn't be any argument about the closest.
No, I think
That's
actually very few of them have got alternatives, but this
Yeah,
one
well,
was when it came up. Yeah,
Okay, iawn, diolch.
quite so.
Thank you. No more questions, I don't think, Anwen.
Diolch. Thank you, Chair. So the second range of comments came from Llanbiangel Nant Bran currently, and when we went out to consultation in the Sennybridge catchment. Again, we reviewed distances to Craddock and to Sennybridge School, and on conclusion, looking at distances, so Llanbiangel is 6.4 miles from Craddock, but only 4.6 from Sennybridge. Our recommendation is that there's no difference or no change to the Llanbiangel Nant Bran catchment. Also in the same area, Pen Pont, a very small area, currently sitting in the Sennybridge catchment. Some comments again for moving to Craddock catchment, but again, similar elements on review of distances, main road and infrastructure. Our recommendation is that Pen Pont remains within the catchment of Sennybridge. Okay, then there's another one, which is Llandew. Now, Llandew sits currently in the catchment of Priory Church in Wales. Again, some comments that Llandew should be within the Craddock catchment rather than the Priory. However, again, on consideration, Llandew to Craddock is 2.7 miles and to Priory is only 1.5 miles, so wouldn't even be entitled to free home to school transport. So our recommendation there, again, is that Llandew remains in the Priory Church in Wales catchment. However, we did look at this next one was Trallong. Now, Trallong is a classic hamlet that when we purely base it on distances and near a school alone, Trallong is one of the hamlets that gets split exactly in half by the catchment boundaries. So taking into consideration comments from all the families, learners, schools, members, local members, etc. And in this instance, take into careful consideration the main road infrastructure. Our recommendation as officers and as portfolio holder is that the whole of Trallong hamlet should fall within the catchment of Sennybridge, because actually when you go to Trallong, you fall onto or drive onto the A40 very, very quickly, which would take you directly then to Sennybridge County Primary. Councillor Aled, sorry, Chair, I don't want to take over your role, but Councillor Aled's got his hand up.
It's only just popped up. Come on, Aled.
Yeah, very quickly. When you divert this line and put it around a village to keep it all together, you still have an obligation, if required, to transport the child to the nearest school.
Okay.
Therefore, I really don't see, this is a perfect example of why I would just not refer to catchment. I would just refer to nearest school, draw the lines in the map and carry on. And then the transport policy can amend this. You could possibly, and if you have that flexibility, it would allow children to go all in one direction if that's what the children wanted to do, or it would allow all the children to go in the opposite direction if that's what the children would want to do. But by diverting the line, it doesn't take away your legal responsibility to take the child to the nearest school. So you might have one child in the yellow zone wanting to go to Craddock, even though everybody else wants to go to Sennybridge. You'll still have to put the taxi on for that one child.
Diolch, Cynghorydd Aled, thank you very much. I know John is not here yet, but I do know that this is one element from what you've just said there that I know that Transport Department are going to consider following this to review their catchment, no, not the catchment, sorry, their transport policy.
So I don't, sorry, to not to undermine the huge amount of work you've done and the consideration of various settlements across the county, a huge amount of work, but I don't see, you know, it won't remove that legal responsibility and possibly not remove the cost of transporting children to their nearest schools. And personally, I wouldn't adjust the maps at all. I'd just leave it as a nearest school. But that's, I know I've been banging on for years. Probably haven't changed my mind, but I'll leave it as that. Thank you.
Well, let's hear what Councillor Peter's got to say on the matter.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. I appreciate the synergy between the two policies, but this is not about how we get children to school. It's about their entitlement to go to a school. And this is in the instances where there is oversubscription, the catchment is a key factor in deciding whether a child should go to one school, place should be offered to a child in one school and not another. So it's this conflation of home to school transport, which has come about by the transport policy that we have, and the reference, and it's quite a common one in Welsh home to school transport policies, of nearest school or catchment school, that creates the issue that you're articulating today. But what we are looking at today is admissions, not how we get there.
That's the difficulty with the item on the agenda today, because they're so interlinked, Councillor Pete, and that's my opening comments today was to try and get people to consider that it is admissions today, but it is so interlinked with school transport.
And sorry, Chair, just come back. Capacity within schools across Powys isn't a huge issue, is it? I don't think a lack of capacity in various schools. I know there are one or two exceptions maybe, but generally speaking, it's not a big issue that I'm sure it can be overcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Anwen, I'm going to allow you to continue now. The point's been made by Aled, and if that may develop as we move on.
Thank you. Emma has got a hand up.
Okay, sorry, Emma.
Sorry.
Oh, hi, Chair. No, sorry, I think I was a bit late popping up there. I think the main element for this isn't about how it has been in the past and how we've approached things in the past. It's about putting this right for the future. And whilst I accept there are surplus places in the county at the moment, we do need to try and reduce those surplus places, as you're all aware. But in terms of the catchment maps, what we're trying to also do is, whilst identifying the primary schools for individuals, trying to identify the natural transition and flow for that planning from primary to secondary. It doesn't take away people's ability to choose school, provided there's capacity that they can choose whichever, but we're trying to get to a position whereby we are compliant with legislation. We have done the consultation that's needed. It will provide that greater clarity for all concerned, rather than having those shaded areas. And then as we move forward as well with the transformation, the two are interlinked because it gives that greater clarity. So this is about forward looking and really getting us to a position today whereby we meet the standards that are expected of us in respect of admissions for schools. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. And I'll reiterate as well, making it clear, open and transparent for parents and learners as well. So when they do apply for a school place, they're knowledgeable as well, that they know their entitlement for transport at the same time. So to try and support our young learners and families as well. Okay, I will carry on then. Moving now to Ysgol Bro Cereinion catchment back in the north. I've gone alphabetically, so Bro Cereinion. Now, when Castle Cereinion School closed last August, I think it was, obviously we had to redraw the catchment maps, and again, based in the primary catchment maps on nearest, it does place Castle Cereinion Village in the catchment area of Bury Primary School. Therefore, some parents requested that Castle should be in the Caranion catchment, but given distances again and basing our work on nearest, our recommendation is that Castle Caranion does remain in the catchment area of Berryw. But before we go any further, I will reiterate it, and it is in the paper on page 543, just to make you all aware, if parents from Castle Caranion wish to opt for Welsh medium education, then naturally they would have the choice then of either Ysgol Gymraeg y Trallwng or Ysgol Bro Caranion, depending on which one it would be their nearest school. So this one would be for the English medium pupils, not the Welsh medium pupils. Okay. Right. Then, no,
and when
go back.
Margaret's got her hand up, followed by I'm assuming yours is a legacy, Emma. Margaret's got her hand up, and then Lucy, please.
Just can I clarify, Anwen, because of course Castle was a church school. So what does that lead to? Because parents could have wanted to send their child and it wouldn't be the nearest school. Now, where does that leave us with this?
Okay, so again, it's the difference between admissions. So from admissions, a parent can choose a school of their choice. That's their legal entitlement. However, not that I want to go into too much transport, however, our current transport policy does not indicate anything to do with religion or in elements of that. So the policy is purely on nearest suitable or catchment school. So in this case, the transport would not take into consideration the previously Castle Caranion being a Church in Wales school. So the answer would be no.
Yeah, and the diocese were quite happy with that.
I can't comment on transport policy, sorry, I don't know.
Right.
Okay, Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously Gareth knows this area much better, but it just seems that it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to be saying, well, the children from that area, if they want to go to English school, English medium, they go to Berryw. If they want to go to Welsh medium, they go to Caranion. If there's not a huge difference in the two, then surely it will make sense to keep the community together as one and enable the children from both language mediums to be able to go to the same school.
Before that comment is answered, Councillor Gareth is indicating, so I'm going to bring Councillor Gareth in, and I might make a comment after that as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Lucy's taken the words out of my mouth. I've had no end of correspondence, as I know has Adrian as well, from members of the community within Castle wishing all to be able to come to Llanfa, because it's a natural flow from there up to Bro Caranion now as a secondary site as well, which is where they wish their learners to go to. And it is so frustrating that we're talking about a very short amount of space. And I would like to whoever, I think it's you, Anwen, and I always very nervous to correct you, but the road from Castle to Berryw is equally narrow as what the road from Castle to Bro Caranion is. And I just feel that is quite leading to get your point over when the roads are equally narrow, which I know you will know that. But all I would say is, even though you may not have had the consultee responses, Adrian, Councillor Adrian and myself have had no end of representation wishing this to be reconsidered and to naturally align with Bro Caranion cluster. Thank you.
Before you come in there, Anwen, can I add to that now? And I'm only using this as an example because it's an area which I know, and I've mentioned it previously when we're speaking about South Power schools. Very often, I'm not really sure where they are situated, but do you think irregularities of this nature will exist right throughout the report?
I was aware of this one, and I've stuck to my guns, even though my own knowledge of Castle Caranion, but I've got to stick. So no, there's a handful which I think you will pick them up as we go through where there's irregularities. There's a few coming up after, which recommendation has gone to stick to policy, gone with nearest. But I welcome the comments from Councillor Lucy, Councillor Gareth and yourself, Councillor Gwynfer. I welcome those comments, and I'm sure Councillor Pete and I can have a look at them again.
And to take it one step further, and I've got to be very careful in my choice of words, but you know, we developed an all-through school in Corinion. We want that all-through school to work, but we can't. So when you're examining it, you're strict to the policy. You're not taking into consideration the schools surrounding that. Obviously, if you take those Castle Corinion pupils, it's going to take pupils away from Berriew, and Berriew is a very strong school. But the education policy at the moment is to try and develop all through schools, and there's an opportunity to send some more pupils to an all through school. So, but that's not under consideration when you're doing this policy. No.
No, I've tried to stick to nearest so that we're consistent and across the county. Yeah,
but I hope you can see my point, and that I can raise that point in future references when we go further down the line as well, can't we? Okay, we'll move on then.
Thank you. The next one, still in Brokeranion catchment, and it does impact the Llanfyllin one, so it will. I'll go flick through it quickly. But Llanfihangel and Gwynfa currently feeds into Ysgol Pennant. There were a few comments that Llanfihangel and Gwynfa should move to be in the Pennant rather than Pennant rather than Pont Robert, but on consideration, again, looking very much at distances. We also looked at Cwm Banwy as well. On consideration with the distances, with Pennant being 10.3 miles from Llanfihangel, Banw 8.1 and Pont Robert 4.3. For us, we felt that this one should definitely remain within Ysgol Pont Robert catchment. So would therefore remain within Ysgol Brokeranion catchment. Okay, however, then we had quite a lot of comments around the area surrounding Llanwddin. Now, of course, we all know that some schools have closed up in the Llanwddin area historically, and children from Llanwddin have historically gone to Ysgol Pennant. There were a few comments that the boundary should be moved south. So Councillor Pete and I spent quite a lot of time looking at the road infrastructure, but also looking at postal routes as well, looking at their postal areas, and our recommendation is that the boundary is slightly moved south to allow that movement to Ysgol Pennant, and therefore thereafter over to Ysgol Llanfyllin for secondary.
Okay, can we go back to the previous slide in relation to
Llanfihangel?
Llanfihangel. I'm only being devil's advocate, but the nature of that area before would have been reaching out to Ysgol Llanfyllin in secondary, but now when they become into the Pont Robert, that will probably make them reach out to Brokeranion.
I think, Councillor, sorry, Chair, Llanfihangel's always been in Pont Robert catchment.
Okay.
From my understanding, and from looking at all the historical maps and nearest maps.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I would argue differently. The pupils that went to Llanfihangel primary school would have gone to Ysgol Llanfyllin.
Historically, right. And when it closed, probably.
I'm just making the point. I'm not precious with it at all.
I believe Councillor Alled's put his hand back up.
Go on, Aled.
There's always a lot of history behind these the stuff, isn't there? I know Llanwddin and Llanfihangel closed roughly the same time, and clearly there's issues. But which will be the closest high school for those children in the Llanfihangel, the old Llanfihangel, the green area there?
Ooh, I'd have to measure it. Pont Robert is 4.3 miles. So, and Pennant is 10.3. Yeah. Perhaps if you give me a few minutes, I can do a bit of Googling.
Yeah,
but I didn't measure the secondary.
No, just like Lucy's points about the for the previous ones about that continuation. floors of communities.
Mm.
I was just wondering which would be the closest secondary school for those children within the Llanfihangel area, Llanfihangel and Wingba area. But thanks. I think that would influence the decision a bit. Thank you.
Sorry.
Causing you complications now, Anwen. You're busy measuring and presenting at the same time.
It's okay. Secondly.
Councillor Peters put in the chat that he's going to explore that, Anwen, so you can continue.
Thank you. Okay, so we've just discussed Llanwddin before. Okay, and then the next one, which impacts again both Bro Correinion and Ysgol Llanfellin. Now, Mayford has always been a village where the nearest boundary for secondary has fallen in the middle of the village. Now, historically, Mayford School has fed into Bro Correinion, but there's been a large number of pupils choosing to go to Ysgol Llanfellin. So I have actually put the pupil numbers there in the table just for you to understand. So in September 2020, of the 4 Year 6 pupils at Mayford School, 1 went to Bro Correinion, 3 to Llanfellin, no to other schools. 2021, of the 14 pupils, 5 went to Bro Correinion, 8 to Llanfellin, and this September, of the 10 pupils, 3 went to Bro Correinion and 5 went to Llanfellin. So you can see there's been a change in tide with more and more pupils going to Llanfellin. However, we had lots of comments from residents in Mayford, many of them requesting move to Llanfellin. So I think given the sense of feeling within the community and working with the governing body, just to make you all aware that the governing body of Ysgol Mayford, and they do have the right to do this, the governing body have requested and written to Georgie Bevan and Lynette, Director and Head of Education, have written to Lynette and Georgie requesting that Ysgol Mayford move catchments to Ysgol Llanfellin. So with their request, I've got no choice but to go with it.
Yeah, Anwen, I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to quantify my last remark, but historically, and this is the problem which we have, Mayford would have been historically linked with Correinion.
Definitely.
So,
well, I can put my hands up.
Yeah,
I've got conflict of interest there, yeah, because for my many years teaching at Correinion, Mayford children came to Correinion.
So the comments I made previously in relation to Llanfihangel are neutralised really, but we have to recognise the desire of
the governing body
living in a village at the moment. Yeah. Any other comment on Councillor Alid's up? Councillor Gareth and Councillor Alid. Councillor Gareth first, please.
Thank you. Yeah, been well aware of this as chair of the governors of Bro Correinion, and we have had many conversations with the governing body of Mayford, and this is something which I feel, as Anwen has correctly pointed out, has organically happened over the years. And whereas it is disappointing, I think Bro Correinion have accepted this. And but going back to what the chair said earlier, and I will bring it up later when we move on to David Llywyd, Bro Correinion was set up to succeed, and we need pupils there. And whereas this has not happened organically, going back to the Castle catchment area, I really hope that you can revisit that and look at that so that we can move forward and succeed like the county wants us to and asked us to. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, before Councillor Aled comes in, one thing I should have said, sorry, I believe it's always been a little bit of, and I've got prior knowledge from being on the governing body of Correinion, etc. I believe now that since Ysgol Bro Correinion has become an all-age school and the closure of Castle Correinion, Ysgol Mayford is the only single English medium stream that was feeding Bro Correinion. So I think that probably that had an impact on the governing body decision.
That's a very valid point, Anwen. Councillor Aled.
Thank you, Chair. I won't comment on this because my son is still in Llanfellin High School. He's coming to the end of education there. But I suddenly realised I was thinking my eldest son is a teacher in Llanfallin High School, but I suddenly remembered he's actually moved to
He's not.
Llanfair now. So apologies. I won't comment on this at all. So apologies. I should have said earlier.
Thank you, Aled. Yep, I think we've covered that. Anwyn, I think we're ready to move.
Diolch. Now this one has, this one does cause quite a lot of heartache. One of the aims is that there's equitable and equity across the local authority. So the only primary school across the whole local authority of Powys that still to this day has a right to go to 2 secondary schools, depending which is their nearest, is pupils from Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd. So it's the only one with a dual catchment. Spent many an hour looking at the data, trying to argue it either way. I don't have a preference. Historically, Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd, when it opened, always fed Ysgol Bro Coranion, but organically again, probably because the lovely road to Coranion over the gibbet, organically more and more of the Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd pupils have done their application and applied to go to Llanidloes High School, which is also a dual stream school. So my recommendation here is that a request to Emma and her team that Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd is moved up and given priority in the transformation so we can understand where Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd's children will move to. Will they be going to Ysgol Bro Coranion or Ysgol Uwchradd Llanidloes High School for their Welsh medium provision? So you may think that it's a little bit of a cop-out for me that my recommendation is that it goes to transformation for review, but I think that's the best way so that they can take into full account the provision in both schools.
Okay, Councillor Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Anne, and I do think it's a cop-out. It would have been great to have had these schools in the catchment area of Bro Coranion. When we had some slides presented earlier, I think we said 19% speak Welsh. It's dropped to 16, I think. I'm going to sound like Aled's brother here. We have the directive to promote and develop the Welsh language. The whole reason Bro Coranion setting up was to go along the Welsh continuum. And if you'll allow me, Chair, I'm not quite sure this is relevant, but the question I would like to ask is when they go up the nice road to Llanidloes, how many of these Welsh learners who've gone through Welsh in Dafydd Llwyd remain in the Welsh stream, as it were, in, say, year 9? How many of them are still going down the Welsh language education? How many subjects are there? This all needs to be put into the pot when it's looked at. In Coranion, I think, apart from French, everything is delivered through the Welsh medium, but through the Welsh language. And that is something we need Powys' help. I say we as Bro Coranion governing body to make it work. We've got such a desire to make it work, but we can't do it without the pupils. And if this is being handed over to the transformation team, it's something that needs to be done urgently so that we get every opportunity to succeed with the numbers and that the Welsh language can continue to grow. Diolch, Chair. Thank you. I'm sorry for telling you how you're a cop-out.
Diolch. Before Councillor Aled comes in, diolch Cynghorydd Gareth, and I'm with you. And not only can my recommendation for transformation would be not only looking at the numbers in following the curriculum in year 9, ultimately how many in year 11 undertake their qualifications through the medium of Welsh. So that progression and that continuum is really, really important, that their actual delivery of GCSEs in Welsh medium. So how many in both schools, not Llanidloes or Bro Coranion, actually how many of those pupils coming from Dafydd Llwyd actually follow their subjects in Welsh by the end of year 11.
Thank you, Anwyn. Councillor Aled.
And I'd back Gareth up 100% there. I think the options are fairly limited in one school, well, more limited in one school than the other school. I know the way that categorized schools has changed now, has it? Or is there a difference? Perhaps there isn't a difference in categorization now between.
There is no categorization, is there?
No, exactly. So we haven't got a firm sort of base to work off, if you see what I mean. But it's important to understand what options have they got. 90% of the options through the Welsh medium, all the way through the school, including post-16 as well. I doubt Llanfair has got that, but I'm almost certain Llanfair is one of the more Welsh schools within the North Powys. So it's important. I wouldn't dare suggest it's a cop-out like Gareth, but it's important aspect that really should be at the forefront of that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. And I didn't feel that I was in a place to make that decision on my own. I think it was a bigger picture and a bigger decision.
Yeah, diolch Anna.
Thank you, Anna.
Diolch, lovely. Okay, now we move to Ysgol Bro Hyddgen cluster. Now, Ysgol Gynradd Carno, where we're looking at feeder schools now. Ysgol Gynradd Carno, as you know, is part of the Federation of Llanbemau'r Carno and Ysgol Glantwymin, all three of them Welsh medium schools. And historically, and they've always been part of the Bro Hyddgen cluster, and they feed to Ysgol Bro Hyddgen. There was some comments made by parents and families of Carno in the consultation that they felt that children from Ysgol Carno should be allowed to move or transition to Ysgol Uwchradd Llanidloes. However, on my recommendation with Ysgol Bro Hyddgen, definitely on the continuum towards a Welsh medium school, and Ysgol Gynradd Carno being a Welsh medium school, that my recommendation is that there's no change here to the catchment area, that Ysgol Carno remains a feeder school for Ysgol Bro Hyddgen.
Thank you. Aled, on this one, please.
Sorry, what are the distances? And my previous comments to the previous catchment still apply. There's a significant difference again in between Bro Hyddgen and Llanidloes from memory, that is. I might be wrong, but and also Carno is relatively close to Newtown. Are there many children opting for an English language medium education in Newtown? And can I also ask where are the plans for Welsh medium school based in Newtown?
I can't answer the last question, but if I go first, and perhaps Emma would like to come in on that last element, but I know that regardless of which way you go to Carno, to Bro Hyddgen, over the mountain to Llanidloes or around Carno, now Casus, or historically children from Carno have actually gone to Newtown High School as well, and even some over to Ceredigion. So Carno has always been a school that children have actually gone 4 ways, but in the recent years, Carno has worked, Ysgol Carno, because of the Federation, has worked with Ysgol Bro Hyddgen very closely. Okay. But I can't comment, sorry, on the Newtown, above my pay scale.
Emma, do you wish to come in there?
I was going to ask Councillor Allen if you could just repeat the second part of the question. Sorry, I was engrossed in the car now to Bro Hyddgen. Can you just repeat the second part, please, Councillor Allen?
Slightly tongue-in-cheek, but if we want to grow the Welsh language, we have to possibly develop Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd into an all-through school.
Okay.
And I was wondering where that is on the transformation agenda.
Okay, so we're currently revisiting the Welsh Education strategic plan, and that's subject to due process. I know that we've been through the process recently. We're just going to go through it again, updating with the ambitions set out by the new cabinet, and then once we've gone through that process, provided everything's agreed, we can then embark on the programme in terms of implementation of the WESP. So I don't have an exact date, but the work on the WESP is imminent.
Diolch, Emma. Diolch,
Marian. Margaret's looking to come in. Are you there, Margaret? You're still muted at this moment.
Won't seem to. Oh, that's it. Fine. Sorry. Yes, I just want to add to the conversation. Sure, because don't forget, we have just been made a Welsh medium school in Trefeglwys. And I think we're forgetting that when we're talking about Corinion and Llanidloes, etc. in Trebeglwys are going to now what will become an all through Welsh medium, a Welsh medium school, and therefore they would automatically in the past have gone and would now go to Llanidloes. And so when we're talking about other children, Welsh medium not going to Llanidloes and possibly going to Llanfair, you are impacting on Trebeglwys children as well and Trebeglwys school.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And can I just
Before
very
you
quickly
come back
comment?
in, I'll jump in at the bit.
And that's why I raised the issue of David Llwyd all through, which I think should play an important part in the West when that gets done. Thank you.
Diolch. And if I come back there, Chair, if that's okay, and Emma, sorry, I think that would come out in the element of transformation ysgol Dyffryn Trannon Trebeglwys, isn't it? And all the element will come out. Diolch. Diolch o galon. And then still in ysgol Brohydgen catchment, minor elements around Melin Burrhedyn and Aberhossan. Currently and always been in the catchment of Brohydgen. There were some comments for Melin Burrhedyn and Aberhossan to move catchments to Glantwymen. However, again, looking at the distances, the road infrastructure, our recommendation is that they remain within ysgol Brohydgen catchment.
Thank you, Anna. Just before you move on to the next one, Councillor Pete's very busy in the chat.
Oh, is it? I don't see the chat when I'm sharing, sorry.
In relation to our conversations in Llanbiangal and Gwynfor, Llanfachlin High School's 5.4, Bro Corinion was 10.6. So I think there's an important consideration there, but you know, we've already discussed that. And then in relation to the previous comments, Carno from the school, Mach 17 miles, Llanidloes 15, which was via the airport 7. Oh, so thanks, Councillor Pete, for helping us with that information. Okay, we're into the quick Howell one now.
Yeah, I have just jumped because on Councillor Pete's recommendation to do this one, the one I've just jumped last. So it's not that I've forgotten about it, I will go back. Very similar comments to where we've been before. Bryn-Gwyn and Dolacannau have always been in the Glade Street catchment. There was some comments for it to move to Cliro. So our recommendation, again, looking at distances, looking at road infrastructure, etc. Our recommendation is that Bryn-Gwyn and Dolacannau move, or we amend the boundaries so that Bryn-Gwyn and Dolacannau fall now within the Cliro Church in Wales catchment rather than Glade Street. Okay. Then we've got Llanelchir, which has been in the Cliro catchment. Some comments for it to move to Glade Street, but our recommendation is that there's no change and that Llanelchir remains within the catchment area of Cliro. If I don't see hands up, I'm going through. Llansteffan, then currently within the catchment area of Archdeacon Griffiths. There was some comments from parents, but on consideration again, that Llansteffan remains within the catchment area of Archdeacon Griffiths Church in Wales School. Some of these are repeated because we're back to Llanidloes again, but this one we have not discussed this one before. There's a small place called Derinol, which is between Llangurig and Rhaeadr. There was some comments by parents and families living in the Derinol area that would like to see Derinol area within the Llanidloes cluster, or catchment, I should say, sorry. Derinol currently is within the Rhaeadr catchment. Our recommendation, again, based on distances, having to go along the track and then onto the main road, that would be the natural route of a minibus. That Derynol remains within the Rhaeadr Church of Wales catchment, and of course Rhaeadr will ultimately feed into the secondary school of Llanidloes High School. Now, we do have some comments around Bwlch y Sawnau. I am going to put my hands up. This one I'm a little bit torn, but I've stuck to my guns and stuck to distances, try to apply consistency. Bwlch y Sawnau currently sits in the catchment area of Llanbista, with Llanbista being 6.1 miles, Llanidloes being 10.3 miles, and Rhaeadr Church in Wales 8 miles. As part of the consultation, there has been some comments that Bwlch y Sawnau actually should go into the Llanidloes or the Rhaeadr catchment. But sticking to my guns and trying to apply principles and be consistent and equitable across the local authority, despite my knowledge of Bwlch y Sawnau, it's recommendation that Bwlch y Sawnau remains within the catchment area of Llanbista.
Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, sorry, this is really a general comment again, but it does concern me. It's very obvious from the comments that are coming back that the majority of us on the committee, or many more of us on the committee, represent the north of the county, and we're much less able to comment sensibly on many of these other parts of the catchment, and I just wanted to raise my concern about that.
I do agree with you. I've made the comment previously to officers. I do agree with you there, and I know this general area, but the further south we go, I find it very difficult. Councillor Karina.
Sorry, I do know this area very slightly. I think the road from Bwlch to Llanbista is not good. Was that one of the reasons why there have been comment?
Yes, and some of the comments said that there's a natural flow of the community, either to Llanidloes or down to Rhaeadr would be the natural flow of the community, was part of the comments.
Yeah, so that is a problem, I guess. Thank you. Yeah.
Diolch. I will move forward. Again, I won't go into discussing Carano and David Llwyd because we've done them already. And then Maes y Ddewen cluster. Now, of course, before I go into detail, this one looked at the catchment of Ysgol Gymraeg Dyffryn y Glowyr and Ysgol Bro Tawe. Now, this is semantics really, because most of the children in this catchment area would walk to school, whatever, so it wouldn't impact. So it would only come when it comes to admissions. There was some comments from the area here of Gyranos that currently falls, because it's the nearest within the catchment area of Ysgol Gymraeg Dyffryn y Glowyr, that it should move to Bro Tawe. Now, they are walking distances, so we've stuck with nearest, because if you were in Gyranos, you wouldn't be entitled to transport to either Dyffryn y Glowyr or Bro Tawe, but Gyranos is closest to Dyffryn y Glowyr, and indeed there is actually quite a substantial main road that the children would have to cross if they would go to Bro Tawe school to the south. So we recommend no change there. And just to make members aware that Ysgol Gymraeg Dyffryn y Glowyr would actually feed Ysgol Gymraeg Bro Dir Ystalyfera, would actually, because it's a Welsh medium school, would go out of county to Ystalyfera. Okay. Now this is quite a multi one. Oh, Councillor Aled is.
Sorry, just flick one back. Sorry, Anwen. Where's the school having a consultation on about Welsh medium now? Future changes.
Oh, Cribawth. Ysgol Cribawth, I think, is this yellow catchment.
Oh, okay. Okay, I couldn't quite remember.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, diolch.
Going to the Newtown area now, where obviously there's quite a few primary schools within the Newtown area. However, we all aware that we've closed the schools in Dolvar, etc. in the past, and there's some comments come back from parents and members here. So if I start with Dolvar, which is to the north of Newtown. Now, Dolvar actually falls within the catchment area of Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd, because Ysgol Dafydd Llwyd, being the Welsh medium, is their nearest school and the Welsh medium school. So Dolvar actually falls within the catchment area of Dafydd Llwyd. But most comments came around probably the rurality element of Penstrawed, Mochtre and Stepaside. Based on nearest school, Penstrawed, Mochtre and Stepaside are actually within the catchment areas of Maes yr Llandyr, where some people felt that they would naturally, or have historically since the schools have closed, have fed to Ysgol Calon of Erwen or the old Ladywell Green Hafren. But this one again, looking at where we've looked at priorities, our recommendation that we don't change the catchments. Parents still have the right to take them to Calon of Erwen, that's within their right, but they wouldn't be entitled to free home to school transport. So Aled.
Sorry, Anwen. If you were an English family living at the very bottom of that map, in the
pink,
and God forbid they didn't want a Welsh language education for their children, you wouldn't be entitled to transport to any of those Newtown schools, would you?
No, not wanting to divulge and go into transport, which is not my department, but our transport policy states that we won't transport children past their nearest school if it's a Welsh medium school.
Yes, and it does possibly create a little bit of friction if on that blue-pink border.
But again, I don't want to go into transport.
Okay, yeah, okay, I won't go there then.
Only because it's not my area forte and not my area. Deal. Okay. Then comments came around Bugaildy, where Bugaildy historically, or in the catchment when we just measured nearest, was in the catchment area of Llanbista. Taking into consideration parental comments and member comments, and looking at the road infrastructure again, and looking at distances, how this one happened, I'm not really sure. Knighton is actually 8 miles away from Bugaildy and Llanbista is 9.6. So on recommendation and looking at distances, Bugaildy is nearer to Knighton. So we've amended the boundary so that Bugaildy moves to the Knighton Church in Wales catchment area. And then Castle Cranion, we've discussed that again, because obviously if we don't review this again, Castle Cranion children go into Berew would then feed into Welshpool High School, not to Scarborough Cranion, but we have discussed that one already. And then minor changes, Llanwrthol, there was comments that Llanwrthol should be in the Newbridge and Wye catchment rather than the Rhaeadr Church in Wales, but on consideration and looking at distances, etc., we recommend no change. Meifod we've discussed, Llanfihangel we've discussed, Llanwddin we've discussed. So I'll now, bear with me whilst I make sure I get to the right one. The one that Councillor Peters asked me to consider last.
Yeah, but back to the Llanwddin, the Pont Roberts issue. The Llanfihangel ones, if I'm right interpreting those, Councillor Pete at Llanwellyn High School is far closer to Llanfihangel and Ngwynfa compared to.
If I've written them right, yes. So it'll have to be one that Councillor Pete and I reconsider. Obviously, so Llanfihangel's nearest to Pont Robert Primary, but then we'll have to consider it when it comes to the secondary. So if I heard Councillor Gwynfor correctly, Llanfihangel was 5.4 miles and Caranion 10.6. So it will be one that we'll come back to.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, it worries me a little bit, and it's only my personal knowledge that has highlighted that. It worries me that other irregularities through the report, and Lucy's mentioned that we are a very today we're a very North Powys I worry that there may be irregularities like that through the report, and that's not detrimental to all the work you put into it. But that does worry me a little bit, to be fair.
I think before Councillor Pete, I think a lot of it is historic, where people have gone to primary, etc. So, but we will consider it even more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pete has got his hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to come in on this. We focused in the paper that's presented here on where anomalies have been raised, and we focused very much on the primary schools and which is the appropriate primary. Amin outlined earlier that the high school catchments are aggregations of primaries, and it is the very nature of the rural area that on the very edges of a primary catchment there are going to be anomalies where the high school is potentially close, where an individual child or group of children are closer to one high school than another. I think the discussion we had around a school at Brokerinian is the classic example of that, where the boundaries for children going to Davis Lloyd in some instances place them within 4 or 5 miles of Llanidloes High School, and a significant distance away from Brokerinian, and the other way round at the other end of the catchment. So if we're looking at this for transition, we're going to have to look again at all of these bordering areas. So Amin and I will take this away and have a discussion about this, and consider what and other anomalies there are that are out there. But in terms of the home to school transport, obviously it's to your nearest or your catchment. So in respect of Llanfihangel and Gwynfa, whilst they are in the catchment for one primary, when it comes on to the home to school transport side of things, they would be entitled to home to school transport to Llanbathin on the nearest school measure.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Councillor Lucy's put in the chat the name of the report we are scrutinising is schools admissions and home to school transport catchment review. Lucy, we did meet this morning. Sadly, you couldn't be with us to clarify this, because I was a bit concerned that we were, although they're interlinked, I didn't want it to turn into a school transport. I don't think John has come in yet, has he, Anwen?
He is here now, yes.
All right, John, would you just like to repeat what you said to us this morning, so that we can understand how school transport will fit in with this policy? Is that all right, John?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon. Apologies for joining a bit late. Yeah, basically what we said this morning was that once the school catchment area, school admissions policy is complete and understood and regularised properly, we can then look at our home to school transport policy, because there's a slightly confusing sentence in this home to school transport policy where it says transport will be provided to your nearest or catchment, nearest suitable or catchment school. And so depending on where we end up with this, the admissions policy, we can then amend the school transport policy to match that. If we go with the catchment area, we will say we will provide transport to your catchment school. And I think that's as, you know, that's the ethos of how we then review our school transport policy to align with the school admissions policy, to try and create that sort of seamless journey for parents. And when they apply for a school, they know whether they are or not going to get school transport.
Does that satisfy us, or has anybody got any comments to come back on that? Councillor Pete, is that a legacy hand, or are you coming back in there now?
No, this is to come in after Anwen has finished, although I'm now experiencing system problems.
No problem. Councillor Lucy, please.
So Councillor Pete had just spoken about the fact that the pupils on the edges of some of the primary catchments would be able to access the secondary catchments that were closest to them because of the option to access their closest school. But if that's likely to be taken away, as part of the school transport review, then that will change. And it just makes a mockery in a way of considering these documents separately, because you consider one document thinking that you understand the basis of the other document, and then the other document is changed. So we have to be really careful that we're clear about the decisions we're making.
Councillor Allen.
Powers can take away the option of the closest school, transport to the closest school. If you're 2 miles or 3 miles away, the legislation dictates that you've got to provide transport to the closest school, whether or not you're in the catchment, defined by Powers or not. My advice to slightly tongue-in-cheek to governing bodies is to align with the high school furthest away from you. And under this policy, you will get transport to that school furthest away, or you can go to the high school closest to you. So, you know, and that's my problem with this policy. Fundamentally, I would get rid of the word catchment and just focus on the closest school and introduce an element of flexibility to aid parents, carers along the intersections between different schools. And I try and simplify it that way, so it's clear for pupils and supports what the councils wish to see. The councils did wish to see, and I was following your motion to council, Lucy, that got full support across the council to aid parental choice where it doesn't cost the council any more in revenue to provide that transport. Thank you.
Councillor Peat, would you like to come back on that? Nope. Right. Shall we move to
Bulch. So this is in the south of the county, so would impact both Crickhowell High School and Gwewnaved. And I'll explain, or do my best to explain to you why, so I haven't gone back enough now. So there's a little village or hamlet called Bulch, and it's sat here, or if you want, right here. Now its nearest school is Llangynydyr. However, historically and over time, what's happened is that children from the village of Bulch have gone both ways. Some to Llangynydyr Primary School, I do believe you can see my mouse, can't you? To Llangynydyr, which is here to the south, which is their nearest school. But some have opted to go to the north here to Llangors Church in Wales School over time. Now, looking at numbers, going to both schools, of the 112 children at Llangynydyr Primary School, which is the nearest to Bulch, 8 currently come from the Bulch area. But I will give a caveat that I was very and highly dependent on making sure on the looking for the word Bulch in the address on Teacher Centre. So I might have missed, but the head teachers think I'm about right there. So 8 come from Bulch and attend Llangynydyr, which is the nearest primary. However, Llangors Primary School, which has 138 pupils and is furthest away, actually based on current pupil numbers, 20 come from Bulch. So we've been through lots of consultation, and I will let you all aware if you're not aware of this area. Even though Bulch is closest, and for some pupils actually would fall within 2 miles, so actually would be below the entitlement to free home to school transport, so would be expected to walk. But I will put the caveat in that we've not done the risk assessment, but probably it would not be considered a safe walking route for pupils to attend Llangynydyr. And also to make you aware, travelling from Bulch to Llangynydyr, there is a very, very narrow 6 foot something wide bridge with a weight restriction. So you couldn't take a 54-seater over the bridge. You could take a minibus over to Llangynydyr. So not sure if that's why parents have historically and learners historically decided to go to Llangorfs rather than Llangynnadew. So based on all the arguments, our recommendation is that Bulk falls in a single catchment area of Llangynnadew, because a large part of Bulk actually lies within the 2-mile distance of Llangynnadew Primary School. However, because many of you, as you've suggested, are from the north, there is significant, and I do mean significant, argument from members from the school and local community for Bulk to fall within a dual catchment. So to attend both Llangynnadew or Llangorfs, but I will put the caveat in, if we were to decide, or local members would decide that it would be the only local area within Powys that would have dual catchments. And as I've said, I want consistency and equity. So I'd want members to consider that very, very carefully. Sorry, Chair, you've got lots of hands.
I have got lots of hands, and I'm not sure if some are legacy hands, but I'm judging on what was there before, and I'm going to go to Councillor David first, and then followed by Councillor Liz.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm well aware of this area. I mean, Llangorfs is a new school, brand new school, built for the numbers based on the number coming from the Bulk area. So that is one issue. The other issue I have is being referred to that Llangynnadew Bridge couldn't take a bus of the size required to take 28 pupils to Llangynnadew School. It would have to go a considerable distance further via Talbot-on-Usk to get to Llangynnadew. You know, it's not cost effective really. And there is the route, if they were to walk, it's not safe because there are no pavements there, and they would have to negotiate that narrow bridge as well. So it doesn't make sense at all to just allow the children from Bulk to go to Llangynnadew. It would cost the authority a lot more, and I think you've got to bear all these things in mind. And I would say we need to refer this back for further consideration, bearing in mind the issues that have been raised.
Thanks, Councillor David. I'm going to come to Councillor Liz next, but I'll let you will be after. You weren't a legacy hand, so Councillor Liz, then Aled, please.
Thank you, Chair. And again, it is an area that I know, whereas some of the areas we've been discussing, I've not been so familiar with. I just wanted to reiterate that I do think that there's an issue in terms of, you know, the interdependencies between admissions and transport, and I don't think you can look at the two in isolation, but I can see why you'd want to in terms of getting the consistency right. I agree with everything. I want to reiterate what Councillor Meredith has said, and I'm not going to repeat it all because those points have been brought to me, you know, by members of the public. And I wholeheartedly agree with what Councillor Meredith said. I think that there is an argument to continue with the dual access. And, you know, the point about consistency, it's really important, and it is a thread that should run through everything. But sometimes there are defensible, justifiable reasons to look for an alternative. And I think this is a really strong case to do that. And I think we did see earlier a situation up in, I think it was either Mid or North Wales, where there was issues of children having to cross a road, and so that option didn't proceed. So I'd like to ask this committee to feedback support to reconsider this one, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Liz. Councillor Aled.
I think the road issue Liz was referring to was in Astraconlais, but that was only supportive of the officer's arguments, really. I would not want to see an exception made for one school. So I disagree with David and Liz that I don't know of one bus that goes straight from my home to school. Almost every bus goes a long way around, picking up children. to access primary school and high school. I think we, and again, I come back to this, my argument about just draw a line in the sand, closest school. You will have to have 2 buses going into that area and going in opposite directions because of the legislation dictating you've got to transport children to the closest school. So I really don't, I know it's possibly difficult, but I just draw that line where their closest school is along a suitable transport route and stick to your policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I'm going to go Councillor Karina, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Pete.
I think that most of the points have been made. I don't know this area particularly well, but William Powell and the Deputy Head of Langorse have explained the situation to me, and I'd like to back Liz and David, Councillor Liz and David. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Liz. Councillor Pete.
Thank you, everyone, for this. When we set out this paper for you, we took the view that we weren't going to create anomalies. This is a dual catchment school. I think we need to resolve that. The question then is, which way do we go? We put the proposal before you that you see now, and everyone has highlighted the huge number of dichotomies and conflicting information in this area. So I'm very, very warmly received the feedback that you've all given to me on this one, and it accurately reflects the discussion that Amwin and I had. We can see both arguments, we can see both directions. It's worth noting that, again, this brings the high school anomaly that we talked about in respect of the Llanfihangel area into play, because Bourke is quite a significant way closer to Crickhowell than it is to Gwynavid. So you add that into the mix. If you look at where the pupils have gravitated, they've gravitated north to Llangorse rather than south to Llangonida. When the initial engagement exercise went out, Amwin tells me it was the reverse of this. It was within Llangonida, and there were lots of parents from the Llangorse, and there were lots of parents from the Llangonida side saying it needs to be in Llangonida. So you quite clearly have a community that is split, and then you throw into the mix all of the home to school transport issues that everyone has articulated so far. So I really just want to thank people for the contribution. I was going to set this in context following Amwin, but I took my hand down because she'd covered virtually everything. We will look again at this, and I hope that the debate might continue for a little longer to give us a better feel, because whatever we do here, if it's a move away from what Amwin and I have put forward, which is what is at question, whatever choice we make, it will create an anomaly of some kind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Liz, I'm assuming that's a legacy hand. Members, any further comment? Anwen, you've completed your report now. Yeah, members.
Sorry, Gwyn, but
go on, Councillor Lucy.
It was a general point again, not relating to that particular map, but there was something that worried me a bit about the consultation. Aware of two of the primary school catchments in my ward and adjoining, where in the past there has been the opportunity to travel 2 ways, and I believe that people will not have responded to the consultation about catchments because they don't understand the difference that it will make. And I suspect that that will be the case elsewhere in the county. When you look at the number of responses to the consultation documents, there are many areas where there's no response, and accept that that's probably mostly where there's no change. But it does worry me that there will be people who haven't responded because they don't realise that actually in the future they will only be able to access one school, and whereas in the past they have felt that they would be able to access two alternatives. And I know that people who are kind of, have been in the process of that application period over the last year or two will be aware of it, but the wider community and people who are sort of, more distant from that immediate application process won't be aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lucy. And we do our best to try and engage with schools and governing bodies and members to try and get them with us. And I think where we did receive quite large numbers was where schools made parents aware and made the local community aware as well, and heavily involved their governing body. So we do try and, all the governor briefings and chair governors to make people aware of what's happening.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we get over that issue, because I have tried hard to make sure that schools that I'm aware of know what's happening, but yeah, it's very difficult to get people to engage with some of these consultations.
And we have shared it in all head teacher meetings, and this is what's happening, please comment. So yes, if anybody ever gets a way of making sure that everybody is aware and responds, I'd like to know.
Well, it was interesting to see that from the Llanfastlan consultation responses, an awful lot of those related to Carragova, but there were no responses from Carragova. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, it is a problem, but I think we have to acknowledge the work that Anwen and her team have put in on this. It's been a massive task. I'm guessing from the feedback that you're getting from us today that it won't be the answer to all our problems in relation to this. Members, there's been many comments made today. Are you happy that we just put it all together? And obviously Councillor Peat and Councillor Anwen are in the meeting today, so they've got a flavour of what has been said, but you're happy that we put it all together and help them in their future deliberations? Or David Meredith, Councillor David, coming in there, and Councillor Aled.
Yeah, Chair. Ystrad I thought was for consideration or not, Anwen. It's not been raised today, but I understand there are children from Ystrad and whether they go to Merthyr or Brecon.
While Anwen's searching for that, Councillor Aled, can you make your comment, please?
I'd like the principle that we are consistent across the county and not to make any exceptions, and that message should go to the cabinet. There are no areas, all areas got difficult issues to deal with, but we should have a consistent approach to transport, school admission policy, and consequently transport policy further down the line. It's got to be that consistent approach. And hopefully we can look at transport policy and introduce a degree of flexibility in the future as the council desired. I think that's an important principle. Personally, I'd like to see the word catchment removed and just concentrate on just draw those lines for closest school. But that's my own personal hobby horse, and different lines for primary and different lines for secondary. So, but that's for the others to comment on, really.
In relation to that comment, Aled, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anwen or Councillor Peat, we're consistent in our policy, bar the opposition to that last one, which you portrayed, really.
Yes.
So,
yeah, exactly.
I think your point is made, Aled, and I think that is something for Anwen and Councillor Peat to consider, isn't it? Is that an approach which we should adopt on this occasion?
Yeah, I don't personally. I can see Liz probably disagree with me.
All right,
but I don't think we should make exceptions.
Liz. Yeah, no, I can't see your hand, Councillor Liz.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that consistency it's really, really important, and it's got to run through everything. But what's the difference between consistency then and a blanket approach? Because that's not helpful, is it? Because the outcome that you want is to get the best for each community. And I'd say 99%, or no, probably not 99, maybe 90% of the time, you can be consistent, but there will always be some situations where you use your professional judgment to make exceptions. And so, potentially I'm saying, suggesting that this is one, because otherwise there's no professional judgment in anything, is there? You just, have an approach and you just stick with it regardless. And I don't think that's very helpful to people. So thank you for letting me have that last.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Councillor Liz. Aled, permit me to challenge you. You say that we need consistency in review of and I know you've got a desire to remove the word catchment, but we're looking for consistency in that. But when you said when we go to the school transport policy that we need a degree of flexibility.
Yes, within fairly strict parameters.
Okay.
And to support the wish of the full council from Lucy's motion back before Christmas. And I think that can be done so long as it's a consistent approach across the whole of the council. And it shows, Anwen will be bored of those thick lines around I keep on talking about. But it is around where the intersection between the two nearest schools. Because that's where we fall down, because when a child half a dozen 20 yards from another 20 meters, sorry, from another child, they have to go in different directions. That's where it makes mockery of council policy. So it's about introducing a degree of flexibility to support parental choice around those borders. But that's for another day, since we can't comment on transport here.
Councillor Aled, all I'll say to you now is read the chat. Councillor David, we will return to your point. Councillor Anwen, have you got an update in relation to Councillor David's?
I know I've considered Ystrad but I just can't get my hands on it immediately. So if I know it's been considered in detail, because I can tell you exactly where it is down in the south of the county, which is somewhere I had to Google and research myself. So I know it's been considered. So Councillor David, apologies, it's missed my PowerPoint, so I will come back to you.
Councillor David, do you wish to make some comment there now, so that Anwen can take forward, even though that she hasn't got the detail with us today?
No, not really. I just raised it because it is one that should have come up for consideration or discussion, and I didn't want it left out, and that's all.
Thank you. Councillor David Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, Ystrad is actually in my ward of Taw Uchaf, and Taw Uchaf has always fallen into the catchment area of Maes y Dderwyn as the secondary school, and Ysgol y Cribbath as the primary school. I know when these catchment maps first went out for review, there was some concern with some residents in the Ystrad area that the village of Ystrad was parts of the village, not all of it, but parts of it were outside the catchment. And there was a request put in to amend the catchment on that basis. And I think that did happen, actually. But
so that's
just
perhaps
to say,
it happened in the original and the informal consultation then, did it?
Yes.
That's why I recognise the name and not this.
Yeah.
And so comments didn't come back this time because the residents and schools were happy with the amendments made following the informal consultation.
That's right. Yeah.
That would make sense now. Why I can't find it on this one. It's in the informal one.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor David. It does help to have some local knowledge on time. So, and that's what we've been crying out for today. So thanks, Councillor David. Members, I know we've come to a little bit of a hard place at the moment in relation to how we want to go forward with this. I'm open to suggestions, really. Aled is making a recommendation that we're consistent in our viewpoint, and obviously there's a disagreement. Are you happy that we just share the viewpoint of the committee? I don't think, do we need to make a scrutiny observation and that's what we need to follow? Or are you happy just to say that the committee viewpoint? What I'm trying to do, I don't want to get into what we got into last time, into voting and things like that. So I think we've got a gathering of information which I think Anwen can take forward in relation with Councillor Pete in their deliberations. Lucy and Wynne are trying to get in. Should we take Wynne first to see what Wynne's going to say?
All I was going to say, Chair, was that actually there's no problem in reiterating both the comments within the document, because committee wants consistency, but obviously there's got to be exceptions. And I think if you pick that up, those are generic comments coming back. It's up to the cabinet then how they approach it in terms of delivering that approach. But it's a true reflection of what happened at the meeting today.
Yep, that's what I was trying to get to. Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree really that I think we can report both sides of the problem. I think I'm supportive of Alid in this case, but yeah, both sides are valid, so we need to report both.
Thank you. I'm going to leave it there if everybody's happy. It's been a bit of a slog, and we've got other agenda items to get to. Members, officers, I'm going to give you an opportunity now. Do you want a comfort break, or are you happy to continue and work through the agenda? If there is no comment, I'm going to continue. As most of us are in our homes or in an office space, if you need to disappear for a while, please do so. We now move on to item 6 on the agenda, the school funding formula. Another heavy document. And again, apologies, Anwin, we're overworking you today, but I do believe we got Mary with us as well. So I'm going to go to, I believe, Councillor David first to introduce this. And then we'll have comment from officers if that's possible. Item 6 in your agenda.
I think, Chair, that finance officers from the Education Service will take us through this document. My input has mainly been to accommodate any required funding coming out of the recommendations within the overall funding going into schools. I don't know whether Councillor Peat would like to add any more detail to that, but it'll be officers from the Education Service who will take us through the report.
No, I'm absolutely fine with that. Anwin, Mary, please. Anwin, I appreciate we've been working you very hard, but
and I promise I will be quiet and I'll only come in to answer questions. So before I hand over to Mary, Finance Manager, just to make you all aware the journey that we've been on regarding formulas. So reviewing school formulas is something that we have to do as a school service on an annual basis to make sure that they're fair, open and transparent to fund all our schools equitably. So we always work based around the school budget forum and our formula review groups, which includes representatives from secondary, primary and our special schools. We have been working with them very, very closely this year, and as per our school plan, we have this year reviewed both the special school funding formula and the secondary phase funding formula. So Mary will take you through the changes and recommendations. And just to make you with it, where Mary from the finance team is here to support, but also Georgie Bevan, Head of Education, is also here to support, and I am here as well if required. So Mary, I will hand over to you, and thank you very much for all the work that the finance team have done alongside school service on the funding formulas. Diolch galon.
Diolch, Anwen. I've got a presentation to take you through. I thought that was probably the easiest way to take you through all the changes that we've consulted on and that we'll be putting to Cabinet at the end of the month. So I'll just share my screen, so bear with me while I'm finding the right screen to share.
The joys of Zoom, Mary.
Right, I do believe I am.
Yep, started.
Sharing now.
There we go.
Lovely. And I think if I put this on slideshow, you'll be able to see it properly then. There we go. Can you all see that? No?
Yes, we can.
Lovely. That's great. So we consulted on 5 different areas of the formula and the scheme and the way that we fund our schools. Back in November, December, and we have to do it under the school funding regulations. We have to consult with all the governing bodies of all our schools on any changes to the scheme or to the funding formulae. So that's why we undertake the consultation, but it's generally good practice as well. So we consulted on the pupil movement policy, the scheme for financing schools, which is what sets the relationship really between schools and the authority in terms of finance. And as Anwen said, we've reviewed the special schools formula and the secondary phase school formula as well. And there was an element specifically around post-16 funding as well. In terms of responses to the consultation, we had 13, which isn't particularly high, but then most of the changes didn't relate to the vast majority of our schools being the primary schools. So we had 6 responses from primaries, 2 from secondary, 1 from all age, and all 3 special schools responded. And there was one where it wasn't clear which school or which sector of school as well that responded. So that's on a line on its own. But in addition to those that responded, there are another 3 primaries represented on the formula review group, another 2 secondaries on that as well. And then on Schools Forum, there are another 4 primaries and a further 2 secondaries. So overall, in terms of sort of active engagement with the whole process, then really there were 13 primaries involved and 6 secondaries, as well as the 1 all-age school and the 3 special schools. So that probably gives a better picture really for the number of schools that engaged with the process. So moving on to just take you quickly through the pupil movement policy changes. Currently, where pupils move from between schools within Powys, we automatically update budgets, and the amount updated depends on when in the year the pupils moved. It's caused a few issues. It was a temporary fix really until we moved to a per pupil or a pupil-led funding formula. So what we propose now that we are implementing that policy in funding formula in the primary sector and proposing one in the secondary sector was that we ended that automatic funding adjustments for pupil movements between Powys schools, and instead keep that consistent with where there are other sort of changes in pupil numbers, where schools are already sort of making requests on a case-by-case basis and make it all the same, so that schools understand what the process is and there's one process to cover all of that really. So, and that proposed process is that the school prepares and submits a request for a review of their formula funding allocation. That would be reviewed by the school improvement advisor and the finance team, and a recommendation then made to the school's management team for consideration. We'd develop a template for that, which schools would be able to request, and then any redetermination of the formula funding would come from the contingency pot budget, which is what that contingency is for really, for any redeterminations of formula funding. In terms of responses to those proposals, there was broad support for it from the schools that responded. Only 4 of the responses were against it, and 12 of the 13 responses agreed with the proposal to go for a case-by-case based policy in future, which is actually in line with over half of the other authorities that responded to a questionnaire from us last year also have a case-by-case policy. So it's in line with many authorities in Wales as well. So that's the recommendation that we're putting to Cabinet at the end of the month, and it's a recommendation that Schools Budget Forum have agreed as well. So I can pause there for any questions on the pupil movement policy, or I can move straight on to the scheme for financing schools and the changes there.
Mary, sorry, I just had a comment from the beginning about the consultations in general, which I just wonder whether the reason that not more schools respond to the consultations is because it's so difficult to model the impact that the proposed changes will have on individual school budgets. I don't know how you overcome that, but it's only when the schools get their individual budgets that suddenly they throw their arms up in horror and say, oh, I didn't realise that was going to have that impact.
Yeah, we do try and model as far as we can, but it is difficult to do that without, and we do aim really to have the consultation undertaken on the basis of principles rather than individual budgets as well. But I do appreciate the difficulties that schools have, because they want to see how it impacts on them and their budgets, and we do appreciate that. It can be difficult.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any other Councillor Peter's got his hand up.
Yeah, I think in answer to the response from schools, the budget consultation was delayed by 4 weeks because of the funeral arrangements for the late Queen, which meant the consultation windows fell later in the year, right off the back of some quite heavy paperwork that, in respect of contingency planning, that came out of Welsh Government. So it's quite possible that the timing of the consultation this year, coming later in the year than usual, actually meant that schools were very busy with the Christmas period and quite literally missed it, as for want of a better term. We're trying to find out whether that's the case, but it's something we need to be aware of moving forward because of the timing that these proposals need to be consulted on in order to come into force for the following academic year.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Any other further comment at this stage? Okay, Mary, happy for you to continue.
Lovely. So the next set of questions in the consultation was around the scheme for financing schools. As I said, this document sets that relationship really between the authority and its schools. So partly as a result of some of the issues that we had in this year in terms of the timing of formula changes and the timing, particularly in the autumn term, we're proposing, the first change that we proposed was to move the deadline for agreeing the formula from December to January, just to allow a bit more time for that consultation with schools, and hopefully to have more time to be able to go through the proposals with schools as well in advance of the deadline for the consultation, so that they feel that they have more information really, or give us more opportunity to give them as much information as we can. The second change is in relation to interest on surplus balances that schools hold, and it's linked with the third change, which is the charging of interest on deficit balances. So just to try and link the wording up and align them a bit better, they were not necessarily easy to follow from one to the other in the previous version. So looking to change that so that the authority may pay interest on surplus balances, and that would be based on the school's closing balance at the end of the previous financial year. Obviously look into the Section 151 officer for advice on the interest rate to be used, with having due regard to the prevailing market interest rates and financial environment. We're also looking to be able to use different interest rates for different levels of surplus and deficit, and to have thresholds for that, and then also to build in a discussion on the interest rates with schools budget forum each year as well. Those are the first three changes, and the final proposed change was around paragraph 4.8, which deals with licensed and unlicensed deficits. So the scheme sets out some sort of ceilings really for the scale of deficits the schools are allowed to hold and be called a licensed deficit, and then sets out some actions that the authority could take or on schools with licensed deficits. And this was just to make sure that those same points were applicable for unlicensed schools with unlicensed deficits as well, and also to add in a reference to all age schools through in that paragraph as well. So just adding those two elements in there. In terms of responses to that, then 10 of the 13 schools that responded agreed with the deadline, change of the deadline. 9 of the 13 agreed with the changing of the words in paragraph 4.3, the interest on surplus balances. 7 of 13 agreed with the changes to the wording of paragraph 4.6, which is the interest on deficit balances, and 9 of 13 agreed with changes in the wording to paragraph 4.8 with 4 neutral. So the recommendation that we're putting to Cabinet there is to implement the changes as proposed with some updated wording for paragraphs 4.3 and 4.6 as was shown on the previous slide, which brings in those thresholds that we discussed. So I'll pause there if there are any questions on the proposed changes to the scheme.
Nothing showing as yet.
I'll move on to the special school formula review, and I'll ask for your forbearance with me on this one. It's not me that led on this change, but unfortunately Nancy, who did, wasn't able to attend scrutiny today, so I'll take you through it as best I can, and hopefully there won't be too many technical questions around it. So we've got three special schools as you're aware, and we reviewed the funding formula for those schools. One of the first things that we proposed to change was around the pupil count date. For school funding purposes, we always take pupil numbers as at the first Friday in November after the October half term, and that's what schools are funded on for the whole of the following financial year, which does go into the next academic year as well. For special schools in particular, because of how much the differing needs of each individual child, the impact that can have on their funding requirements, we suggested and we proposed that their funding formula would be adjusted in September to reflect their intake in that September as well. So in terms of response to that, 2 of the 3 responses agreed to the proposal, 1 disagreed, and that was a concern around in-year transfers. So as a result of that, we've got 2 recommendations in terms of the pupil count date. 1 is to implement the proposal to make that adjustment to reflect the intake in September each year, and also to ensure that special schools are included in this pupil movement policy that we discussed on earlier on. So the proposed formula for special schools that has 4 components in it, and we're trying to have a consistent approach across all our schools. So we've got 4 components within the primary school formula that's being phased in at the moment, and you'll see later there are 4 components that we're looking to bring in for the secondary phase formula as well. So component 1 is where we provide most of the funding for teaching and learning, and it's a pupil-led element. And for the special schools, we're basing that on banding and ratios for individual learners. So, so that there was a simplification, really, a reduction in the number of bands. The previous formula had 10 bands. It was felt that this was too many and it was complex to understand and to follow. So that's been simplified down to 4 main bands for learners that meet the criteria for attendance according to the new ALN Act, and then an additional 5th band for those learners that are currently at special schools, but wouldn't meet the criteria of the Act if they were to present now. So obviously it would be extremely disruptive to move them from the special schools now. So there's no proposal that happens, but in terms of the funding the school receives for those learners, we're looking to fund those at the current primary and the proposed secondary per pupil amount from the relevant formula. And in addition to that, to provide any band-led funding that learner would attract based on their particular learning needs. So all 3 of the responses that we received on this did disagree with the banding criteria and the ratios, and the main issue was around the severe developmental, or I think the severe emotional and behavioural difficulties, and in particular around the teaching assistant ratio. So the service manager for inclusion has had further discussions with all 3 schools, and it's clear from the school's feedback from that they are still keen that these formula changes are implemented, but that further discussions are needed really around the ratios. That the plan is, because obviously with these banding and ratios, not every learner will fit neatly within the banding criteria. So that there is an agreement that individual learner needs will be considered on a case-by-case basis, where the ratios don't really apply. And the other thing to point out as well is these ratios are simply a way of distributing the use of these ratios is simply a way of distributing the funding to the schools. It's not telling the schools that that's what they must put in place for those learners. It's a way of being able to share the funding fairly between the 3 schools. So moving on then, there's a component 2 is to do with lump sums, and this was these are related to sort of the provision of at the school that can't be funded on a per pupil basis. So just to make sure that there's enough provision within the funding formula for leadership and management at each school, ensure that there's sufficient there for administration at each school, and also for their external grounds area, there's a grounds lump sum as well. So all 3 responses agreed with the methodology for the leadership and management. There were some concerns around revision. There were proposed revisions to the ISR calculations, and that's in relation to the leadership, funding for the leadership at each school. So the other school then did agree, but subject to the bands being reviewed. In terms of the administration lump sum, 2 of the 3 respondents agreed with the proposed lump sum. 1 was concerned about whether 1 administrative post would be sufficient due to the workload around IDPs. But again, this is a way of sharing the funding fairly between the 3 schools rather than telling the schools they can only have 1 admin post. So that's not the intention. And all 3 responses agreed with the grounds lump sum calculation. Component 3 is the unique factor, and this allows the kind of additional funding for schools really to take account of their individual circumstances. And there are 7 proposed for the special schools formula. There's the class size top up, surplus square meterage. So the per pupil has an element in it for the building area, for the internal area of the building. And then if there's more, if the building is bigger than that, then this top up would provide that additional funding that's needed for the running costs of that building. There's a top up at the moment for all our schools for building condition. So that's been replicated within the new formula for special schools as well. And there's also a top up proposed around site layout and safeguarding and risk mitigation in that. And I think that there's a general acceptance that the 3 special schools are, we've got 2 in the process of being replaced now, but the current schools, the layout doesn't always lend itself to the most, and it impacts on the number of teaching assistants and supervision that's needed on the site to ensure safeguarding for all the pupils. So there's a top-up proposed to allow for that. Again, there's a similar to the building square meterage top-up, there's a ground square meterage top-up, and statutory testing and insurance and rates we're planning to we're proposing that we fund on the same basis as currently, which is, and the same as for primaries and secondaries, which is to provide funding based on actual costs. And for the special schools in particular, there's a hydro pool allowance because of the impact that would have on their costs, particularly in terms of utilities at the moment. So all 3 responses that we received to this element were either agreed or were neutral on all those top-ups. The 4th component then is the county-wide improvement priorities. And this is where we're providing the funding for the satellite provision top-ups. So at the moment, we're rolling out that provision of satellites across the county. And as during the process of rolling that out, the satellite provision top-up and the funding for that will be provided through this component 4 element. And all 3 responses agreed with methodology for funding the satellite provision. In terms of the implementation, what was proposed was that during the financial year, if the proposals are agreed, that during the financial year 23-24, until the end of the academic year, the current academic year would be funded on the current formula, and then the new academic year would be funded on the basis of the new formula. All 3 responses disagreed with this on the basis that they were keen to get it implemented from the 1st of April. I think we're continuing with the recommendation to implement from September, just to allow time for planning for any redistribution from the introducing the new formula. If we usually, certainly with the primary schools, we've been phasing that in over 3 years, so it allows schools that time to plan either for additional income or funding or for a reduction in funding. So we're continuing to recommend that it's implemented from the 1st of September instead. So that's it on the special schools formula. If anybody's got any questions on that, we're basically recommending that it's proposed, that it's implemented as it was proposed for consultation, with those further discussions to be had with schools on a case-by-case basis, then where learners don't, where the banding doesn't really meet the needs of learners. I don't know if anybody's got any questions before I move on to the secondary formula.
Margaret's put her hand up. Margaret.
Sorry, yes, I just wondered, obviously it had a process and everybody has been involved, the schools have been involved, but have worked through how is it impacting, or haven't you worked through the new formula, this formula, to see the impact it would have on schools from a funding point of view? Because from my point of view, I'm seeing the figures, I'm seeing that, you know, I can read, etc. But how is it going to impact on that school and the ability of the school to provide what's required for the pupils?
So yes, all three schools, special schools, have been really heavily involved in the development of the new formula, which is why they're keen to see it go ahead. We have done some modelling. Obviously, that modelling is based on the current year only.
Well, obviously, yes.
Yeah. So and there is a bit of redistribution. Two of the schools would gain a little bit in funding. One loses sort of not huge amounts. So I think it's, you know, all the changes are manageable. We consider all the changes to be manageable by the schools. But I think we'll be rerunning the funding for schools now at the end of February. And that, I think, is when we'll have that opportunity to work with the schools and they'll see the impact of it then. But we do modelling, you know, just to make sure that it doesn't, that there's, well, yeah, just try and make sure that it meets the needs really, and that they'll be able to continue to deliver what they need to deliver.
Councillor Alid has also indicated.
Yeah, just a quick question really, Mary. Is your overall level of funding within the special schools remaining the same? Or will these? Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, all the changes on this were within the same funding.
And it's probably the overall change is possibly 1 or 2% or something pretty small, is it? Or is it more significant than that?
It is, yeah. I don't have the exact percentages to hand, but yeah, it is relatively small. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Murray, happy for you to move on.
Okay. So the secondary formula review. So there are two parts to this. The first part is a proposed amendment to the current formula in relation to those schools we have that have got more than one secondary campus. They've raised with the authority on, you know, several times really that the current formula doesn't recognise their additional costs, and the current formula does provide for those schools that are have got two secondary campuses. It does provide, in terms of teaching and learning, it treats them as two completely separate schools, but it does treat them as one school in terms of leadership, technician support, ALN coordinator and administration. And when we've looked at it in more detail, there is something to the argument around, you know, whether or not it acknowledges that they need to have additional leadership because there are two sites for them to manage, and they need to have a teacher in charge on both sites. Also, technician support for lessons you know, would be needed on both sites, and also the need to have a reception, a school's reception area on both sites as well. So there's a proposal to amend the current formula to acknowledge those additional costs for those schools. Both the consultation responses that we received disagreed with this proposal, but neither of those were the schools actually that would be impacted by this. So neither of those were the two schools that have the split secondary campuses. Both of those schools have raised issues with the authority for a number of years around this. So the authorities happy to continue with the recommendation really to amend the current formula to acknowledge those additional costs. I can see Georgie's put a hand up to come in on this one.
Diolch yn fawr, Mary. Can you hear me? Because I've taken my headset off. Yes, okay, thank you. It's also worth saying here that Mary and I met with representatives from other counties that have got split sites as well to look at their formula. So we know that we're mirroring other counties regarding the way we allocate the funding and the pressures that the two sites does have on the day-to-day running of the schools. So that is why we've still stuck with that amendment, because we've looked out of Powys as well regarding that pressure. Diolch yn fawr, Mary.
Thank you. So moving on then to the new formula, as I mentioned briefly before, we're looking at 4 components, exactly the same as with the primary formula that we're in the middle of phasing in. We've got a per pupil sum for component 1, and that's a set amount for learners in different stages and phases of their education. Component 2 is the ALN funding, and that's notional funding for ALN. And again, with the formula, we provide funding for the school based on a number of different elements, but once it's delegated to the school can use that for educational purposes, but the detail of how they use that is up to them really. Component 3 then is again the unique factors, basically to look at individual school circumstances, and then component 4 is where we're looking at county-wide improvement priorities, and that's an area that there aren't any proposals on in the current proposals being put forward. So we asked schools if they were content with the funding formula being based on these 4 proposals, and one response agreed, one response disagreed, based on the fact that revision of the secondary formula has been a high priority for the authority since the ESTA inspection in 2019. The recommendation here is to base the new secondary formula on these 4 components and align that with the primary and with the special formulae. So the first step then was to establish the per pupil allocations for component 1. We did the modelling based on a model school of 600 learners, and that's the average size at secondary school in 21-22, and we applied the current secondary funding formula to that model school to derive the per pupil amount for Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, and there's different amounts for Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. And just a quick reminder really around how the current formula provides funding for teaching and learning. So for Key Stage 3 for teachers, there's 1 class per year and per stream of 1:15 ratio, and the remainder is on a 1:30 ratio. So that's teacher pupil ratios. And the only exceptions to that then are in design and technology and in science. And as you see on the screen there, there's 1:20 and 1:25, and that's to allow for that slightly closer supervision in those subject areas. On Key Stage 4 then, we've got again the 1 class per year per stream for the 1:15 ratio. And the purpose of that is really to allow schools to have those smaller year groups for those learners that need a bit of extra support really. And again, in Key Stage 4, the remainder then is on a 1:30 ratio, except for the options, which is on a 1:25 ratio. And the current formula funded for teaching contact ratios, the amount of time the teachers are in a classroom, is 0.83 of a teacher's time on average. So the current formula uses average teacher cost. What we're proposing with the new formula is that we find the closest point on the teacher scale to that. And for 22-23, that was UPS 2. This doesn't include TLRs, there's separate funding provided for those. The other thing to point out, because it's something that does come up quite often, is that the funded average teacher cost is slightly different from each individual school's average teacher cost, and that's because we cap the funded teacher cost at the school's individual school range, which is the range that leadership's costs should be within, really, and also on the number of notional posts identified as part of that. And again, just a note there, really, that the small first class in each year group and in each stream is effectively providing that support for those small groups and learners that need a bit of additional support. And another slight change from the current formula in terms of how we calculated that component one is around the SLA funding. We currently make sure that the funding provided to schools exactly matches what they're charged, whether they opt in for or what they would have been charged if they opt out of the SLAs. So what we're proposing now with the new formula is that this is included within the per pupil calculation at £47 per pupil, as that's the level that matches the overall current charges. And then we applied that per pupil funding that was calculated for Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 to all secondary age pupils based on actual pupil numbers to derive what each school's allocation would be. And the amounts per pupil for 23-24 that we've modelled are 4,129 for Key Stage 3 and 4,414 per pupil for Key Stage 4. And that's really a reflection of being the breadth of curriculum that's provided then through the options at Key Stage 4. In terms of responses, we had one consultation response that agreed and one that disagreed. And the one that disagreed was really around they didn't see the need to change from the current formula, but were content with the methodology if things were to change. So in terms of our recommendations there, we are recommending that the base of the per pupil allocations is then modelled on a 600 pupil school, and also recommending that we review whether the UPS2 is appropriate in terms of the average teacher cost funding, whether that's an appropriate level each year. So that's by reviewing for all the secondary phase schools what the average teacher cost is, the funded average teacher cost, and then with whether that's the most appropriate point on the teacher pay scale to include that. There was also some further potential amendments to the calculation for per pupil allocation, so further changes away from how we currently fund schools. So one of those is around the teacher contact ratio, so amending that from 0.83 to 0.815, and that is estimated to cost around 390,000. And also to build in an element into the formula for cover supervisor funding on the basis that it's more efficient really for schools to employ cover supervisors rather than pay for supply or for agency staff to cover. And there's an estimated cost to that of around 250,000. So the recommendation is to change the calculation of the per pupil allocations to include these two amendments as well if additional funding is identified. In terms of component 2 then, that's the notional additional learning needs funding.
Sorry, Maddie.
Yeah.
Can you just go back one slide? Yeah. Wouldn't the supervisor element stuff lead to a saving?
It will at the schools. So this is making sure that the formula provides the funding for them to employ and encourage that kind of employment of a cover supervisor, and they should then see a reduction they will see a reduction in their supply costs. We currently provide funding for supply or an estimate through the formula, but most of our schools are spending more than that on actual supply, particularly in the last couple of years, I think.
Okay, Joe.
Thanks, Aled. I had seen you with your hand up, but I was hoping that we'd get Mary through it and then get some questions at the end. Georgie's got a hand up now.
Talking about Chair, it's just worth noting here as well that we've begun conversations with some of our larger primaries around that as well, around the spending patterns with supply and the challenge, and whether they should consider a cover supervisor. And again, we've considered that as part of our support during the finance meetings this term and moving forward, because it is a challenge for all schools, that amount of money, and particularly with the current climate, with illness and COVID, that's the impact of that still. But that is something that we've also picked up with some of our larger primary schools too, to consider as part of the way that budget is allocated.
Thank you, Georgie. Okay, Mary.
Okay, thank you. So just on the notional additional learning needs funding provided through the formula, we're looking at an ALN lump sum applied equally to each school of around 83,000 to allow for an ALN coordinator on a leadership scale, and also a pastoral teaching assistant, so to provide that funding for each of the schools. So, and our recommendation there is to calculate component 2 on that basis, really. So the next sections, the next set of slides is all around the unique factors. And in terms of teaching and learning top-ups, we found that if a school had fewer than 600 pupils, or if it's a dual stream school, if either stream had fewer than 600 pupils, or if it's a 2-campus school, if it had either campus had 600 pupils or fewer than 600 pupils, there was a top-up needed to make sure that they could continue to provide the breadth of curriculum that they're currently providing. And that's particularly important for the dual stream schools. I know there was some nervousness amongst some of our dual stream head teachers around the impact that moving to a per pupil funding model would have on their ability to deliver a curriculum in both English and Welsh. So this top-up really will enable them to do that. And it's based on different year group sizes and an additional top-up of 2,835 per pupil that they're below the top of that, top of those bands, really, just to allow for the fact that they have smaller groups and the per pupil funding wouldn't necessarily allow them sufficient funding to be able to sort of stack those groups appropriately if they wanted to be able to deliver the curriculum that they are now. So that's the teaching and learning top-ups. So we had both strongly agreed with the small school top-up, so and both agreed and one strongly agree for dual stream if it's below 600 pupils, and there was one agree and one disagree for the campus, for the split campus schools. So our recommendation there is to continue to implement on the basis of the teaching and learning top-up as proposed in the consultation. In terms of our smaller schools, we also needed to provide a top-up in terms of management and administration to make sure that they had sufficient funding really for an appropriate teaching and leadership structure, TLR structure, business management, technicians and cover supervisors. And based on our current modelling, we're recommending that that would be at £333 for each pupil below 592. It wasn't 600 based on the modelling. So between 592 and 600, the per pupil funding was providing sufficient funding for them to be able to have everything they needed in place, but below 592, they needed an extra amount per pupil. And again, in terms of responses, one was neutral, one was agree. So we're recommending to calculate the small school management and administration top-up as proposed. Then, and this is exactly the same as the top-up that we discussed previously for those schools that have got more than one secondary campus in terms of that management and administration. So we're recommending that there's additional funding of 98,960 for that additional senior leadership, additional technician support to cover both sites, and that administration for the 2 receptions. So both responses disagreed with this proposal again, but again, we're recommending that it goes ahead as well. And in line with what we did with the primary formula as well, we're proposing a bilingual administration top-up just to acknowledge the additional costs of providing education through. It's more the administration costs really of having a Welsh medium or a dual stream school. And so we're proposing an administration top-up of £5,000 per school. Again, we had one neutral response and one agree. So we're recommending that that's implemented as proposed. There are other top-ups then more in relation to the premises. So there is some internal floor area funding provided through the per pupil allocation based on 6.3 square metres per pupil, which is from the building bulletin. And this top-up would provide for the difference between that area and the actual area of the schools. So one response was neutral, one was agree on that proposal. There's also, we're proposing a top-up for building condition. So both responses agree to that. A top-up again for the grounds area. So there was an element within the per pupil for 37,000 square metres of grounds for the model school. So this would provide the difference then between that and what each individual school actually has in terms of grounds that it has to manage. So one neutral and one agree in the response to that. And then in terms of business rates, statutory testing, premises insurance and employee insurance, we're proposing to provide funding at the level of the charges for those. And that's one neutral and one disagree with that. So on taking all those responses together, we're continuing to recommend to include the premises related top-ups as set out above and in the consultation as well, so as proposed. The next slide is on implementation. So excluding those 2 additional elements that I mentioned earlier on, the modelling of the proposals indicated that it would require an extra 133,860. And then those additional elements then for the teacher contact ratio and the cover supervisors would add a further pressure of 640,000. Based on our modelling, again, for all secondary schools, or the range of different, we did some modelling that we shared with the schools of a range of different types of schools that mirrored some of the school setups that we have in Powys, and all schools bar one particular type looked to gain from these proposals, and the one that didn't, the reduction was 6,000 or so. So relatively small. So, and that was before adding in these additional elements for the teacher contact ratio and the cover supervisors. So, so in terms of implementation, what we're recommending is that that the new funding formula is agreed and that implementation would take place once the additional funding required had been identified and agreed as well. Because it's favourable for all schools, really, that there's no reason to phase it in at all. And that's the last slide I've got on the secondary formula. There's just a couple of slides then on the post-16 funding principles, but I don't know if there are any questions on that before I move on.
Okay, I had a bit of difficulty unmuting there. Margaret's got a hand up, followed by Councillor Allen and Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. That was, yes, a lot to look at, but particularly, I suppose I was focusing on ALN when you were talking about that, because going back to the Estin inspection and following on from that, the very significant developments, positive developments in ALN in the county have been, you know, notable. And so it was looking at that with having to implement schools, having to implement a new act. Now, my concern is that have we got the funding right, and how will it work in our schools with the new requirements of the Act? And from a scrutiny point of view, I don't know how we're going to be able to monitor that. I know how we used to do it in the past in some respects, but we're in a very different place now. So I suppose that's where I'm coming from. I'm hoping that the funding will allow the schools to fulfill the requirements that they now have to do with the new Act.
Yeah, I think in terms of the funding, one of the requirements of the Act is that the ALN coordinator is on the senior leadership team. So we've included that as an amendment to the funding formula. So that's, you know, from a funding formula side of things, that's addressed that issue. I think in terms of, you know, the detail of how they implement their requirements, I think I'd need to defer to Hayley or to Georgie if Hayley's not around.
Hayley's here. Hayley's here, Mari. So.
Oh, she is. I can see her hand up.
Go on, Hayley.
Thank you, Chair. Diolch yn fawr, Chair. Apologies, I'm not on camera. I keep trying and it's flickering, so I keep turning it off so that I can contribute. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Margaret. I mean, I think we all understand that it's challenging for our schools and challenging for our Lencos, you know, implementing a huge piece of important reform alongside curriculum reform and in the aftermath of COVID, which has had a negative impact on so many of our children and young people, and indeed on some of our staffing. But I wanted to say that as well as providing the funding for the schools within the formula, which obviously this section of your meeting today is about in scrutiny, it's important to note that we also do have a very strong and experienced central team here to support them as well. We do make sure that we regularly attend head teacher meetings. We've recently implemented our new Elenco cluster champions as well, and each cluster has nominated an Elenco champion. We're providing those with very specific bespoke training and supporting them so that they can in turn support their cluster. So there is a great deal of support to help our Elencos, our head teachers and senior leaders with the implementation of the Act and with, of course, the new ALN code. But I thought it was just helpful to to note that here for scrutiny, that working with the work on the formula runs alongside the work we're doing there as well, to make sure our schools are thoroughly well supported. And just briefly, if I may, Chair, in terms of monitoring, which Margaret mentioned, I think is so important. In terms of monitoring, I think it's really important to note that one of the things we're doing is to look at the readiness for the Act and the readiness for implementing the code, which we're doing with our school improvement advisors visiting schools, and also monitoring how many of the new conversions are being made under the code and the Act as well. I hope that that's helpful information for you.
Thanks, Hayley, for that update. Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Gwynfor. I was just looking at the resource implications within the report itself. It does talk about 197k or 198 more or less would be additional funding would be required until the new formula is implemented. Why? Well, sorry, can you explain that bit?
Sorry if you can hear anything in the background. The dog's clearly getting upset by something. So yeah, the 197 relates to the split secondary campus amendment that we're making to the current formula. So it's the same calculation. This was on, if I go back up a few slides, it's two lots of that 98,000 really.
I see. Okay, and the proposal is for that to go ahead straight away then, is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. But the main bit, the other, he's probably starving, a poor dog. bit like me. But the main element is this 640k, which when you talk about when resources allow, at what stage? Well, possibly it's a more question for Pete, really. At what stage do you expect that to be able to be funded, especially when you think the school's budget draft budget published yesterday was £3.8 million underfunded? I was just wondering, you've gone through the intricacies of formula change here. I hope the overall formula is not becoming more complicated, which is important that we need to keep that relatively simple after that major shake about 5 years ago. But when do you foresee this 640k becoming available?
My understanding is that it's part of the current budget discussions, that they're within those discussions now, really. So that is part of that discussion the cabinet will be having as well on the budget as well. So it's as you say, it's a balancing act.
Okay, so it could be swamped by that 3.8 million then. These changes will be relatively insignificant when you got that level of underfunding. It's probably possibly a question not for you, but for Lynette or Pete, cabinet members. Sorry.
I think it's a question of timing as well, though, potentially as well. Yeah.
Okay, true.
Right, is Councillor David or Councillor Pete available to make a comment to help Aled up in his assumptions there? Okay.
No. I'm here, Chair.
David, do you wish to comment on that, or?
Yeah, my understanding is that the extra funding for the secondary phase schools, the new formula funding, the requirement there for almost 134,000, that is going to be available. It can be covered with the new funding settlement we've had for education, the increase in the settlement then from Welsh Government. There's still some work to be done around this, the £640,000. Hopefully we can fund that, but obviously the budget's in draft at the moment, and there's still some information we're waiting for, to say the least. We need to understand exactly what the end of year position is going to be for 22-23, and obviously we've got to look at what savings is going to be generated through the school's transformation programme. But as it stands, the 134,000, yes, that's definitely going to be funded.
Thanks, Councillor David. Councillor Lucy.
I was just wondering about the 3.8. It's sort of million, David, underfunded.
Yeah, I
It
don't know where
just-
I don't know where you're getting that figure from, Aled, because
Your
there's
papers.
there's an extra £5.6 million going into schools, and that's going to cover the increase in the teachers' pay award for next year. Plus, it'll give additional funding to schools on top of that, which is where part of this funding will come from. There's also an extra £5.7 million went into school reserves at the end of last year. Now I accept that some of that's already been used, but there's going to be some of it left as well to help cover some of the challenges and pressures schools are going to face. But at the end of the day, I do accept that there are going to be challenges left for governing bodies, but that's nothing new in itself, is it?
But you're expecting the schools to draw £3.8 million of their reserves to balance the budgets?
No, I didn't say that. They've got to manage their budgets because there is going to be a shortage. There's no question at all about that. That's because of the current economic challenges generated by inflation, etc. But
not all schools have reserves.
We will address that on a case-by-case basis, but there's still some work to be done around that.
Okay. Thanks for that little bit of a debate. Councillor Lucy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A couple of questions. One's very straightforward and one's a wider question. So straightforward, is the building condition top-up sufficient? You know, we know a lot of schools are struggling with the condition of their buildings, and I just wondered how we make sure that that actually is enough for them to keep on top of the work that needs doing. And then the second question was just around the top up for small schools to provide those who can't provide an effective education based on the per pupil allocation. And I guess that's, again, it's a wider question, probably more around schools transformation, but it's around the cost of maintaining those smaller schools.
If I take your second question first, if that's all right. So not the only driver for this, but part of the driver for this is to allow that greater transparency really about the top-ups that we have to provide to our schools and to the current schools estate, really, particularly with primary schools, but also with the secondary schools, you know, just to have that transparency really about you know, how much in addition to the per pupil funding we have to provide in order to ensure that they can provide that, you know, the current breadth of, or you know, the breadth of curriculum that we're currently funding them for. So that's one of the elements of this. So you know, that will then make sort of support then the school's transformation strategy as well. In terms of the building condition top up, it's a mechanism for providing extra funding for schools, depending on their school building condition. I don't think it's possible necessarily to really measure whether it's sufficient. It's more a recognition that there are differences in running costs between schools that are in condition A and schools that are in condition D, but it won't necessarily match up, and it's not the intention that the funding formula should match up individual circumstances for each school on each element of it. It's about making sure that we distribute it as fairly as we can between our schools, whatever the overall quantum is, really.
Okay, thank you.
Hayley, you've still got your hand up. Is that what you wishing to come back in, or is it there from before?
Apologies, I'm having some difficulties lowering it, but I'll keep trying.
Okay, no problem. Members, any other questions in relation to this? It's obviously a heavy document, and Mary's very capably taking us through it, but are we happy that we've considered the impact and the appropriateness of the formula in all aspects? Councillor David Meredith. David Meredith, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, we can, I understand we've got to have the formulas, but they're not going to meet school budgets. I'm just concerned, and I would like advice really as local authority reps on governing bodies, where we stand, where schools are looking to set a deficit budget, which might not even be licensed by the authority.
I think that would probably be a question for Jane, who isn't with us today. So, Georgie, are you able to give us a stab in the dark on that one?
Thank you, Gwendolyn. Just all I can say at this moment in time is that we are working with every school on an individual basis and reviewing, you know, debt recovery plans that are coming in, potential savings. There have been a couple of schools that have asked for the service to come in and work more intensely to look at spend patterns, potential savings, etc. And we've done that successfully in one secondary. We're back in one next week around that. So I think at this moment in time, we are still working very closely with schools to try and have a more comprehensive picture at the moment of where each individual school is. But at the same token, those discussions will come once we've got all of that information in, and we are using what we have as well to sort of capture conversations, if that makes sense. And again, we'll come back to Jane as we get closer to the deadline of budgets. But at the moment, we're still going back and forth with schools. Some spend plans have come in, and the accountants have looked at that, said potentially this. We've had some people have used the toolkit and what that's identified, but like I said, we've also been able to go into a couple of schools with bigger teams to look at really forensically at potential savings and give that feedback for the school then to decide. Because like you said, Councillor, it is the responsibility of the head teacher and the chair of governors, which is where the challenge comes, because we can only continue to advise, and then we'll have to make a decision if we're still in that position at the moment. But like I said, school by school, really effective working relationships. We bearing in mind the challenge that we're in at the moment and what a difficult time it is. We haven't had any problems with schools. Everybody's on the same page and they're doing their absolute utmost. And when we have a really comprehensive picture, we'll have that guidance then from Jane as to our next steps.
Thank you, Chair. I hope that helps, David. Councillor Allard.
Thanks, Chair. I guess ultimately you can withdraw delegation, can't you? If at the final point, as has happened to one school. There was a piece of work, all schools submitted information second week of December, was it? I had asked whether it's possible to see a bit of a summary, you know, and then, so we as a committee have an understanding of where the schools are at the moment across the council. We have little snapshots of individual schools, but not the whole situation. And I was just trying to copy the table from yesterday's cabinet paper into the chat, but it doesn't work. But it is use of deficit of £3.846 thousand pounds there, and that will put quite a pressure on some schools that are already in deficit position.
Yes, that doesn't include the £5 million extra that went in school reserves last year.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but
okay, just bear that in mind.
Yes,
because,
but there are still schools in deficit
just,
positions.
Yeah, can I just come back to the point about deficit positions? I think one of the concerns last year was with certain schools that they used this extra money that came on very, very late in the year to actually clear their deficit budgets, and at the same time, they actually disposed of their budget recovery plans. Now, that is a level of irresponsibility, but what's done is done, and I do accept that there's some schools going to be in very, very difficult positions because of that action. But putting that to one side, what I did say earlier on was that if schools do run into financial difficulties next year, because we do accept that there are enormous financial pressures developing, and they're still going to be with us right through next year, that we'll have to look at on a case-by-case basis, and that can be done through the education service and the financial surgeries. We'll see where we go from that. But as it stands now, I've got that 3.8 million. Yes, I can see it there. But that doesn't take into consideration the 5.7 million, 5.3 million that went into school reserves at the end of last year.
I do appreciate that, David, and the previous council did make significant inroads in trying to balance the budgets of the schools, but I'm afraid this draft budget will put that into reverse.
Okay.
I don't comment at that at the moment because I don't believe that's going to be the case. But we'll have to wait.
Well,
and see
if the overall deficit is lower at the end of the next financial year than it is at last spring, I'll be surprised, but we'll see.
Well, as
Okay.
I say, you know, let's take into consideration what's already gone into the reserves, what should be sitting in some reserves with some schools, and bearing in mind there's going to be a significant reduction in some of the financial pressures that are going to be challenging schools next year.
Okay, I think we're going to leave that there now. We've had a good session on the funding formula, and if anybody has got any burning questions, I'm happy to take them. But otherwise, I'm going to leave it there and rule that we've given it due consideration and made good comment on it. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. It was the scrutiny recommendations.
I think there was post 16 stuff. Gwynfor.
There's one slide on post 16.
Oh, apologies, Barry, go on.
Sorry, I know.
I'm sorry.
It might have been wishful thinking.
getting ahead of myself. I do apologize.
That's fine. So yeah, just moving quickly on. It's only one slide on post 16. The committee will be aware of the changes that have been worked through in terms of post 16 delivery and Power 6. And this is about bringing the funding mechanism in line really with what's now in place with the Operation Management Board and the Strategic Management Board as well. So we're proposing that the post 16 grant is no longer distributed on the basis of a formula, rather it's based on a commissioning basis. There's an element for homeschool provision, which is where the learners will be registered. So that's to take account of their wellbeing and enrichment, pastoral career support and guidance. And that would be allocated on a per learner basis to each individual homeschool. Funding for the Welsh Baccalaureate qualification would also be allocated to the homeschool, as they'd be the school that would be putting their learners through the exams or through the process on that. So that would be distributed on a per learner basis as well. And then the funding for post 16 courses would be provided on a per course basis as commissioned and agreed by the Strategic Management Board. And the other element as well was to make sure that there was that commitment. If a course is started for year 12, then when they move into year 13, that there's a commitment that it be provided in the following year if learner numbers warranted as well. And that the funding would be the same, whether it's for courses, whether it's delivered through Welsh or English, in person or virtually through ESCOL. And both responses that we received on this element agreed with all those proposals. So we're recommending that all those proposals are agreed as well. And that is it now.
Thank you, Mary. Any questions, comments on the post 16? Okay. We will bring it to a conclusion now.
I'll stop sharing.
Hey, thank you, Mary. It's obviously been a long session for you, and Georgie and Anwin for contributing. It's obviously in good hands, I will say, and the information that you hold is good. So thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr. Members, we will now move on to scrutiny recommendation. There's one at 7.1, and it's the scrutiny recommendation in relation to Bro Hugden. The information is available 723 to 726. Members, are you wishing to make any comment on it? Do you wish me to take you through it in any more detail?
Sorry, Chair, just still trying to find it.
Okay. The only thing which which brings to mind, and I'm like yourself, Aled, I'm trying to find the document now. The comment in relation to the leisure centre, the leisure side of this, is slightly irrelevant in view of what had happened in leisure services pre-Christmas. But I don't think there's any need for comment at this stage. Any comment required on that? I'm like yourself, Aled, still trawling through the documents now to get to it.
Just for noting, Chair, if you're happy with it.
Yeah, no, that's what I was suggesting. Aled, are you happy that it's been seen?
Yes, if you've got comment to make on the actions, I'll get back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, are you happy that it's noted?
Yep. Happy.
Good, thank you. And then moving on to your work programme, which is below that, item 8 on the agenda. Members, you will see that it's a little bit more populated until what you've seen it lately. Obviously, we've got some budget scrutiny in there. We are also mindful of the fact that if no alternative budget comes forward, that we may take up those meetings to do some further scrutiny on other items. Members who are having difficulty having meeting dates, the dates are there for you if you want to note them. And the usual question, do you think anything needs adding to it? I have mentioned about leisure services, would that be St John scrutiny, but certainly we would, if in view of what happened before Christmas, that we need to see what the impact of anything proposed in that would come forward to education. So that may be shunted in there at some point.
Chair, just to confirm, I'm still scrolling down, but the revised West will be available for us to scrutinise.
31st of May. So in our 31st of May meeting.
Okay, thank you.
It will be sooner than that, Chair. I think we're proposing to hold a special meeting somewhere towards the end of April, because we'll get a revised document. We're just waiting for timescales yet as to when it comes through. Because the other thing, you've also got, I think Kath has now confirmed the date for the self-assessment meeting as well in March, I believe.
Okay, yeah, that's there now. Members, you content with the work programme? Any further comment?
Just very quickly, Chair, apologies again, banging on about it, but I'd like to see that piece of work on the financing of the school at the same time as we're seeing the budget scrutiny on the 31st of this month. So we got a baseline, more something for Georgie and Mary to take away, really. Would that be possible?
In relation to individual schools, you mean now, Aled?
Yes, well, or it can be summarised, pulled together with some sort of report about the current state of play of the financing of our schools as we contemplate the next year's financial, next year's budget. I think it's important that we have that baseline.
Reasonable request, Georgie? Yep, head nodded there, Aled.
I did see it.
Margaret.
Yeah, I would agree with Aled over that completely. But the other one that I still, and I haven't got the list in front of me, I'm sorry, the programme, but it is, we were hearing a lot about ALN again and new developments, etc. I just feel it's an area we mustn't neglect with the new Act and everything coming in. And it's just raising that as an area that we've got to keep a track of in some form.
Okay, Margaret. I don't think we've got it in there, to be fair to you. I'm just scrolling through it now, but yeah, certainly noted. And Hayley, are you still with us? Probably not.
Yes, I am still here, Chair.
Hayley,
I'm still here, sorry.
Just thinking in relation to Margaret's comments that do you think we could have an update at some point?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, very happy to provide an update on where we are, particularly in terms of readiness for the Act. We are doing a piece of work on that this term actually, and we will have a report that we'll be able to share with you. So that might be a very good starting point.
Thanks, Hayley. We'll keep in touch over that and see where we can squeeze it in then. So thanks for that.
Talking about Chair.
Apologies, old hand.
Oh, okay. Old hand from old hand. Okay, work program complete. Good. Members, I'm going to close the meeting. Opportunity for a reflection once we've stopped recording if you wish. But it has been a long afternoon, and I thank everybody for their commitment to it. Officers and members, and any members of the public and press that are watching us. And I think we've given everything due scrutiny. So thanks for your attendance this afternoon.